He grabbed her rifle out of her hands the moment she stepped off. The transport laughed in her face, held it above her head like a trophy, and said, "Sweetheart, this thing weighs more than your future here." 40 men roared. She said nothing, just looked at him with eyes so calm it should have terrified him. It didn't. That was his first mistake, and it would not be his last. If you've never seen arrogance get buried in the snow, stay with me. Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels. And don't go anywhere because what happens next will change the way you think about strength forever. The transport helicopter set down hard on the frozen landing strip at Fort Kodiak, Alaska, at 11:47 on the night of December 24th. The rotors hadn't even stopped spinning when the first boot hit the ice. Senior Chief Petty Officer Derek Holloway stepped out first the way he always did, chest forward, a jaw set, like the cold was something he personally needed to dominate. He was 38 years old, 6'2", with 17 years of active SEAL service, and a reputation that preceded him into every room like a wall. He had deployed to 4 continents, survived 2 ambushes that should have killed him, and never once, not in 17 years, lost a field exercise. He was not the kind of man who expected to be surprised. Behind him, the rest of SEAL Team Delta poured out of 3 separate helicopters, 40 operators total, all of them seasoned, all of them decorated, all of them quietly furious about spending Christmas Eve in Alaska instead of home with their families. They pulled gear, checked weapons, blew warm breath into frozen gloves, and muttered to each other in the low-controlled way of men who had learned long ago that complaining was fine as long as you never stopped moving. "Tell me again why we're doing a winter evaluation in the middle of Christmas," said Petty Officer Second Class Dominic Reyes, yanking his pack from the cargo hold. He was 29, dark-haired, quick with a joke, the kind of guy who kept morale alive with sarcasm and never let anyone see him actually struggling. "Because someone on the Joint Chiefs decided we needed humbling," said Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb, pulling his balaclava down over his ears. He was older than most of them at 42, quiet and methodical, a man who had seen enough to distrust good news and trust bad weather. And Alaska in December is the universe's way of humbling everyone. "Speak for yourself," Holloway said without turning around. "I grew up in Minnesota." "Then you should be fine," Reyes said. "Personally, I'm from San Diego, and I think this is a war crime." Quiet laughter moved through the group, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes because everyone was cold and tired, and none of them actually knew what the next 72 hours were going to look like. The briefing they'd received had been deliberately vague. Winter combat evaluation, AI-assisted scenario, full combat rules of engagement. That was it. No enemy designation, no mission parameters, no extraction timeline, which meant it was going to be worse than anything they'd been told. Commander Nathan Rivers was waiting for them at the edge of the landing strip. He stood without a coat, which was either a power move or a sign of genuine indifference to the cold, and watched his operators assemble with the quiet patience of a man who had already decided how this was going to go. He was 51, lean in the way of men who had never stopped training, with deep-set gray eyes, and a stillness about him that made younger operators instinctively straighten their posture. He waited until every man was present and accounted for. Then he spoke. "Welcome to Fort Kodiak," he said. "Temperature tonight is -22, with a wind chill factor that'll push it closer to -35 by morning. Storm front is moving in from the northwest. You've got 12 square miles of frozen wilderness, a fully active AI monitoring system, and a standard elimination protocol. Last man or unit standing completes the evaluation." He paused. "There will be one additional participant in this exercise." That got attention. Heads turned, men looked at each other. "Who?" Holloway asked. Rivers said nothing for a moment, just let the silence stretch. "You'll meet them at 0500, he said. "Get some rest. You'll need it." He walked away before anyone could ask another question. The 40 operators stood in the dark and the cold for a few seconds, looking at each other, and then Reyes said what everyone was thinking. "One additional participant in a 40-man elimination exercise against Delta Team." "Yeah," Webb said. "That's either the bravest person alive," Reyes said, "or someone who has absolutely no idea what they signed up for." Holloway picked up his gear. "Probably both," he said. The base barracks were old and drafty and smelled like diesel and pine, but they were warm enough, and the 40 operators made themselves at home with the efficiency of men who had slept in far worse places. They set up gear-checked weapons, ran diagnostics on their communication equipment, and argued in low voices about what the additional participant situation actually meant. The prevailing theory established within the first 20 minutes by Holloway and quietly agreed upon by most of the senior operators was that this was some kind of joint training PR exercise. Someone from another branch, maybe a Marine Raider, maybe a Green Beret, had been dropped in to observe or participate in a limited capacity, a gesture of inter-service cooperation. A box being checked somewhere in a Pentagon spreadsheet. The second theory, floated by a young SEAL named Petty Officer Jorge Castillo, who was on only his second major evaluation, was that it might be some kind of AI-piloted drone system they were being asked to counter. Nobody took that one seriously. "It's probably a Ranger trying to prove something," said Chief Petty Officer Raymond Martinez, cleaning his sidearm at the table near the window. He was 35, built like a defensive lineman, the kind of physical presence that made rooms feel smaller. "We've done joint exercises before. We'll work around them. Or we'll embarrass them," Holloway said from across the room, not looking up from his map. "Or that," Martinez agreed. Nobody mentioned the possibility that the additional participant might be someone entirely outside their expected frame of reference. It simply didn't occur to them. Why would it? They were SEAL Team Delta. They were the reference frame. At 0430, Holloway woke up before his alarm, which he always did, got dressed in the dark, stepped outside to check the sky, and saw the second transport helicopter coming in low from the east. He watched it land, watched the door open, watched one figure step out, small, light on their feet, moving with a kind of quiet precision that was either deliberate or entirely unconscious, the kind of movement you either trained for decades to achieve or were simply born with. Carrying a rifle that looked from this distance almost comically oversized for their frame. Holloway stood very still. Then he went back inside. "Wake up," he said to the room. "I think I just saw our additional participant." At 0500, Commander Rivers gathered the full team in the briefing room. Standing next to him, not behind him, not to the side of him, but next to him with the specific positioning of someone who had every right to be exactly where they were, was the additional participant. She was 18 years old. She stood 5 feet 4 inches tall. She had dark hair pulled back in a tight braid, pale skin that had already started to redden at the cheeks from the cold, and eyes the particular shade of gray-green that people sometimes call storm-colored. She was wearing standard-issue cold-weather combat gear that fit her well, not borrowed, not too large-fitted, and she held her rifle in a way that had nothing performative about it. No showing off, no self-consciousness, just the easy, natural hold of someone for whom that particular weapon had become an extension of their body. She looked at 40 elite operators looking at her. She didn't blink. Holloway was the first to speak. He didn't mean to be rude. He told himself that afterward, in the way people tell themselves things that aren't quite true. He was just being honest. He was just saying what everyone else was thinking. "Commander Rivers," he said, his voice carefully measured, "is this a joke?" Rivers looked at him. "No," he said. "She's a child. She's 18. She's a girl." The word landed in the room in a way Holloway didn't intend, or maybe in exactly the way he intended, which was worse. Several of the younger operators shifted uncomfortably. Martinez kept his face neutral. Webb looked at the ceiling. The girl looked at Holloway. Still didn't blink. "Sniper candidate Ava Hale," Rivers said. "She'll be participating in today's exercise as a full combat entity under standard rules of engagement." Holloway turned to look at Ava directly for the first time. He took in the rifle. He took in her size. He did the calculation that men like him are always doing: threat assessment, capability projection, baseline assumptions. And the answer he arrived at was so conclusive that he almost felt sorry for her. "What's your record distance?" he asked, not as a challenge, as a fact-finding mission. 1,400 meters, she said. Her voice was quieter than he expected. Not soft, just quiet. The kind of quiet that means a person has learned to be economical with their words because they don't need volume to make a point. Holloway nodded slowly. "Decent for a candidate," he said. "You know what our operators can do?" "Yes," she said. "And you're here anyway." "Yes." He waited for her to say something else. She didn't. She just looked at him with those gray-green eyes and waited right back like she had all the patience in the world and he was the one running out of time. Something about that bothered him more than he could articulate. He turned back to Rivers. "With respect, Commander, this seems like a liability issue. Your concern is noted, Rivers said, and dismissed. Anything else? There was a beat of silence. No, sir, Holloway said. He went back to his seat, but he didn't stop looking at her. And she didn't stop not looking at him. She'd already moved her attention to the briefing materials on the table, studying the topographical maps with an intensity that was either rehearsed or completely genuine. He couldn't tell which, and that too bothered him. The betting started within 15 minutes of the briefing ending. It was Reyes who organized it because Reyes organized everything that wasn't officially sanctioned and several things that were. He moved through the equipment room with the quiet efficiency of a man who had run this kind of operation before collecting buy-ins with a small notebook and a ballpoint pen. Odds on the candidate, he said. What are we betting on specifically, Castillo asked. Time to elimination, Reyes said. I've got a line at 45 minutes. First insertion to first confirmed elimination tag. 45 minutes is generous, Martinez said, checking his weapon without looking up. I'm a generous man. I'll take 15 minutes, said a SEAL named Briggs. He was 26 and had the absolute certainty of someone who had never been genuinely surprised by anything because he'd never allowed himself to be in a position where surprise was possible. She'll hit the first tree line, realize what she's walked into, and freeze. Weather does the rest. 20 minutes, said another voice. 30, said Webb. Reyes wrote everything down. Then he walked over to where Ava was sitting alone at the end of the briefing table, still studying the maps, and he crouched down next to her chair with the particular expression of a man who thinks he is being kind. Hey, he said, listen, I want to be straight with you because I think you deserve that. This exercise, it's not really designed for what? She said, not looking up from the map. Reyes paused. For someone in your situation, he said carefully. Now she looked up. My situation, she said. I just mean we're Team Delta. We've been doing this for... I know who you are, she said. I read all 42 of your personnel files last week. The sentence landed with the silence of something heavy being placed on a table. Reyes blinked. You. 42, including Commander Rivers, she said. I know your deployment history, your tactical preferences, your reaction times under stress, and your most common failure points in extended cold weather operations. She paused. Yours specifically is patience. You move before you have to. Reyes stared at her for 3 full seconds. Then he stood up, put his notebook back in his pocket, and walked to the other side of the room where Martinez was waiting. Change of plans, he said quietly. What? Martinez said. I'm taking the money out of the pool. White being. Reyes thought about how to explain it. He looked across the room at Ava, who had already gone back to the map and was tracing a route with her finger, her lips moving slightly like she was running calculations. Gut feeling, he said. Martinez looked at Ava, looked back at Reyes. You're serious. I'm from San Diego, Reyes said. I don't do cold, I don't do debt, and I don't bet against people who've done their homework when I haven't. Martinez watched Ava for another moment. She's 18, he said. Yeah, Reyes said. I know. Holloway found Commander Rivers alone in the equipment bay at 0545, running a final systems check on the AI monitoring interface. The system was military grade, a constellation of sensors, thermal imaging nodes, and positional tracking units spread across the 12-square-mile exercise zone. Every elimination would be tracked, recorded, and confirmed in real time. There was no arguing with it. There was no ambiguity. When the AI flagged you eliminated, you were eliminated. Commander Holloway said, a word. Rivers didn't look up from the interface. You have 60 seconds before I need to finish this, he said. The girl Holloway said, Ava Hale. She shouldn't be here. Not for this exercise. Not against Delta. Whatever her scores are in controlled conditions, this is what she requested, Rivers said. Holloway stopped. What? She requested this specific exercise against this specific team. Rivers looked up from the interface. I approve the request. She's 18 years old, and she requested, Rivers said again slowly, like the word was important, to be evaluated against the best team we have in the worst conditions we could construct. And I said yes. He went back to the interface. Your 60 seconds are up. Holloway stood in the equipment bay for a long moment after Rivers stopped speaking. He was trying to find the right frame for what he was feeling, and the closest he could get was this. He was not worried about her. He was worried about what it meant that Rivers wasn't worried about her. There was a difference. He just couldn't quite articulate it yet. He went to get his gear. At 0600, the insertions began. The protocol was staggered drops, each operator inserted at a different point along the perimeter of the exercise zone with a 15-minute window before the scenario went active. The idea was to ensure no clustering at insertion force, independent navigation, and let the AI system establish individual positioning baselines before engagements began. 40 insertions, 40 starting points scattered across 12 miles of frozen wilderness. Ava was inserted last. That was Rivers' decision, and he didn't explain it to anyone. What it meant in practical terms was that she watched every one of the 40 operators disappear into the tree line, one by one, each of them carrying superior firepower, superior physical size, superior experience, and the absolute collective certainty that whatever happened today, they were not the ones who needed to be afraid. When the last operator was gone, Rivers walked up beside her. She was standing at the insertion point, rifle slung across her back, looking at the tree line. The wind had picked up in the last hour, and snow was falling harder now, the kind of steady, serious snowfall that doesn't commit to being a storm, but refuses to stop either. "You sure about this?" Rivers said. He asked it the way he always asked it, not as a challenge, not as a warning, just as a genuine question from someone who understood that certainty has to be confirmed before it becomes trust. She had been asked this question before, by him specifically, 7 times over the past 2 years. The answer had never changed. "Yes, sir," she said. "Martinez is in Sector 4. He's the one you need to be careful with." "I know. Holloway will try to establish a perimeter command by hour 2. He always does." "I know. You have the maps committed completely." Rivers was quiet for a moment. Snow landed on the shoulders of his jacket, and he didn't brush it off. "Your father built this program," he said. "I want you to know I think about that every day." Ava looked at the tree line. "So do I," she said. She stepped into the snow and disappeared. Not slowly, not gradually, not in the way of someone moving into terrain. Just gone. Like the wilderness had simply accepted her. Rivers stood at the insertion point for another 30 seconds after she vanished, which was 25 seconds longer than he had planned. Then he went back to the monitoring station, sat down in front of the AI interface, and waited for the exercise to begin. He had run a lot of evaluations in his career. He had never watched one the way he watched this one, not with dread, not with hope, but with the specific feeling of a man who knows the ending of a story and understands that knowing it doesn't make it any less extraordinary to watch unfold. At the base of the first ridge in the frozen dark between 2 stands of old-growth spruce, Ava Hale stopped moving. Not because she had to, but because in her father's system, the system she had learned before she learned to read the system, built from years of genuine Arctic survival and tactical philosophy that had no name until her father gave it one. The first step was never movement. The first step was listening. She closed her eyes. 40 men, 12 miles of territory in the storm coming in from the northwest. She listened to the wind. She listened to the way the snow was falling, the angle of it, the weight of it, the way it would reduce visibility in the eastern sectors faster than the western ones, and push heat signatures toward the monitoring sensors in the south quadrant. She thought about the 40 personnel files. She thought about Holloway, his certainty, his need to establish control, his tendency to anchor his command position in elevated terrain. He would go for the ridge above Sector 7. She was sure of it. She thought about Martinez, patient, disciplined, physically dominant, the one Rivers had warned her about, the one most likely to adapt, the one most likely to do something she hadn't predicted. She thought about Reyes, quick-moving, instinct-driven, most likely to make a decision before he meant to. He'd said that himself without meaning to in a psychological evaluation she'd read 3 times. Then she opened her eyes, and she began to move, not fast, not slow. She moved the way terrain moves, not through the environment, but with it, like she was part of the sequence the landscape was already running. There was no sound. There were no tracks that told a coherent story. There was only the snow falling steady and certain, covering everything. And somewhere inside 12 miles of frozen wilderness, 40 elite operators were beginning to understand that the thing they were looking for had already found them. They just didn't know it yet. At 0647, the AI monitoring system registered its first confirmed elimination. The operator was Briggs, time from insertion 41 minutes. He never saw anything. The AI confirmed the flag at precisely 0647 simulated headshot angle of approach. From below the ridge shooter, undetected zero trace evidence at sight. Back at the monitoring station, Rivers looked at the screen. He allowed himself one small breath. Then he watched the screen for the next flag. He didn't have to wait long. Back in the wilderness, Dominic Reyes stopped moving at the edge of a frozen creek bed and held up his fist to signal the two operators behind him. They froze. Reyes had been in this business long enough to trust the feeling at the base of his skull when something was wrong. It wasn't protocol. It wasn't doctrine. It was just the particular electricity of knowing at a level below conscious thought that the world had shifted while you weren't looking. The feeling had started about 6 minutes ago. He couldn't explain it. Nothing had happened. He hadn't heard anything unusual, hadn't seen any movement, hadn't detected any thermal signature that broke the pattern of the terrain around him. But something was different. He crouched down and looked at the snow around his last 3 steps. Then he looked at the snow 15 feet behind his position. He looked for a very long time. Then he said very quietly to the two operators behind him, "She's already been here." And neither of them said anything because the cold truth of it was sitting right there in the snow in the absence of evidence that should have existed in the presence of a silence too complete to be natural. She had passed within 12 feet of their position without leaving a single track they could read. And she hadn't engaged, which meant she'd chosen not to, which meant she was somewhere ahead of them, which meant she already knew where they were going. Reyes thought about his own words from a few hours ago. She moves before she has to, and understood with a clarity that felt almost personal that he had made a catastrophic error in his read of this situation. He hadn't been describing her weakness. Without knowing it, he'd been describing his own. "Fall back," he said. "She's not even close to us," one of the operators said. "Fall back," Reyes said again. "Now, different road. Don't use the creek bed." They looked at him. He looked back. Something in his expression ended the argument before it started. They fell back. Above them, in the branches of a spruce tree that had stopped being visible in the snowfall 20 minutes earlier, nothing moved. Nothing had to. At 0715, the AI flagged a second elimination. At 0731, a third. At 0752, a fourth and fifth, simultaneously 2 operators in Sector 9 who had believed their overlapping coverage would make them invisible. The AI confirmed both flags within 4 seconds of each other. Angle of approach different for each. Shooter position unconfirmed. Trace evidence none. Back at the monitoring station, one of the technical operators running the AI system looked up from his screen and said to no one in particular, "That's not possible." Rivers didn't look up from his own screen. "Why not?" he said. "The geometry," the tech said. 2 simultaneous eliminations from 2 different approach angles means she was in 2 positions simultaneously, or she set the second shot up before she took the first one, Rivers said. The tech was quiet. "She pre-positioned," he said slowly. "Yes." "From how far out?" Rivers finally looked up. "That's the question, isn't it?" he said. In Sector 7, Derek Holloway was doing exactly what Ava had predicted he would do. He had moved to the high ground above the ridgeline, established a command position, organized 8 operators into a defensive grid with overlapping fields of fire, and was in the process of building a coordinated response strategy based on the elimination reports coming in over the communication channel. 5 eliminations, 2 sectors, 0 confirmed sightings. "She's using the storm for cover," he said. "Reduced visibility when disrupting thermal imaging. She's working the edges." "Then we tighten the center," said the operator next to him, a veteran named Kovacs. "Exactly. Consolidate into Sector 5, create a kill zone, and wait." "Wait for what?" "For her to come to us," Holloway said. He said it with the complete confidence of a man who had never seriously considered that the thing he was hunting might have already moved past the point where coming to him was necessary. He pulled out his map. He looked at the topography. He began drawing lines of approach, calculating fields of fire, designating sectors. It was good work. It was the right work. It was the kind of coordinated tactical response that had gotten his team through situations far more dangerous than a lone sniper candidate in a training exercise. He just didn't know yet that the map he was drawing is the map she had already finished drawing 3 hours ago, and that every line he put on it was a line she had already planned around. The storm continued to fall. The AI continued to flag eliminations. And somewhere in 12 miles of frozen wilderness, something that moved like an ecosystem and thought like a strategist and had spent 2 years preparing for exactly this moment was running a battlefield that 40 elite operators didn't yet understand they were already inside. Holloway looked up from his map. For just a second, just 1 second, he had the feeling he was being watched. He looked around at the trees, at the snow, at the gray-white silence of the Arctic morning. Nothing. He went back to the map. Above him, a branch shifted almost imperceptibly in the wind. Or maybe it wasn't the wind at all. At 0800, the AI monitoring system had logged 7 confirmed eliminations, 7 out of 40, in less than 2 hours of active exercise time. And not a single operator had reported a visual confirmation of the shooter. Not one. The communication channel had gone from confident, tactical chatter to something quieter, tighter, more careful, the kind of silence that spreads through a unit when the situation stops matching the model they had in their heads, and nobody wants to be the first one to say it out loud. Holloway was still at his high ground position in Sector 7, still drawing on his map, still building his response. But the pen moved slower now. The lines he drew had more hesitation in them than they had an hour ago. 7 eliminations, 0 sightings, and the pattern of the flags on the AI system made no geometric sense to him. They were scattered across 4 different sectors, separated by distances that suggested either multiple shooters or a single shooter moving at a speed that was simply not possible for the terrain and the conditions. "She can't be moving in that fast," Kovacs said beside him. "Not in this snow. Not in this wind." "I know," Holloway said. "So either the AI is glitching, it's not glitching. Then how?" "I don't know," Holloway said. Those 3 words cost him something. He could feel it, the small, precise loss of something he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it had weight. He set the pen down on the map and looked at the tree line below the ridge and tried to think like she thought, which was the problem, because he had no framework for it. He was trying to read a language he had never been taught. His radio crackled. "Holloway, this is Webb. We just lost Peterson and Cross in Sector 3. Holloway's jaw tightened. "Confirmed. AI flagged both of them 40 seconds ago. Same approach angle." She sat up on the ice shelf above the creek and waited for them to cross the open ground. "How long had she been on that shelf?" A pause. "Kovacs," Webb said slowly. "Based on the AI's thermal backtrack, she was there before Peterson and Cross even entered Sector 3. The radio went quiet. Holloway stared at the tree line. She was there before they arrived, which meant she hadn't reacted to them. She had predicted them. She had looked at the terrain, looked at the insertion points, looked at whatever map existed inside her head, and decided these 2 will come through here. And then she had gone there first and waited. That was not sniper work. That was something else entirely. "Consolidate," Holloway said into the radio. "Everyone to Sector 5, now, double time, don't use the marked routes." "What routes do we use?" someone asked. "Make your own," Holloway said. "She knows the marked ones." There was a beat of silence on the channel that said more than any words would have. Then the acknowledgments started coming in one by one, and Holloway picked up his map, folded it, and put it in his pocket. He looked at Kovacs. "Move," he said. They moved. At 0822, as 16 operators were in transit towards Sector 5, the AI flagged 2 more eliminations. Operators Huang and Bell, Sector 6, different approach angles, 0 trace. 9 down, 31 remaining. Back at the monitoring station, Rivers watched the screen with the stillness of someone who has made peace with the outcome of something and is now simply witnessing it. The technical operator beside him had stopped making comments about geometric impossibility. He had moved past disbelief and arrived at a quieter place, the place where you stop fighting what you're seeing and start trying to understand it. "She's not moving between shots," the tech said. She's not doing this sequentially." "No," Rivers said. "She's setting multiple engagements up at the same time, like she's running parallel kill chains." "Yes." "How long has she been training this method?" Rivers was quiet for a moment. "Since she was 12, he said. The tech turned to look at him. Rivers kept his eyes on the screen. "Her father developed the doctrine," he said. "She grew up inside it. By the time most kids are learning to drive, she had already spent 4 years running this methodology in simulated environments." He paused. "And 2 years in real ones. Real Arctic environments. Real everything," Rivers said quietly. The tech turned back to his screen. He watched the positioning data for a long moment, the 40 dots that had become 31 spread across 12 miles of frozen wilderness, some of them moving fast, some of them going still in the way of men who had decided that movement was more dangerous than stillness. She's controlling the whole board, he said. It wasn't a question. She has been since insertion, Rivers said. At 0845, Dominic Reyes made a decision. He had been moving through Sector 8 with two other operators, Torres and a quiet, careful man named Ellison, who had survived 2 overseas deployments by being the least interesting target in any room. They had been moving slowly off the marked routes, using the ice-covered rock formations as cover, doing everything right. And Reyes had the feeling, that same base of the skull feeling, that it wasn't enough. He stopped. Torres almost walked into him. "What?" Torres said. "Stop moving," Reyes said. "We're already barely—" "Don't move," Reyes said, quietly, seriously, in the voice he used when the situation had moved past discussion and into the territory of just do what I'm telling you. Torres stopped. Ellison stopped. The three of them stood in the frozen stillness and listened. Wind, snow, the distant creak of ice contracting somewhere below them. Nothing else. And then Reyes said, "She's watching us right now." Torres looked around. "You don't know that. She's been 2 steps ahead of every squad on this exercise. She knew where Peterson and Cross were going before they got there. She set up on Huang and Bell from a position she had to reach before they even entered the sector." Reyes looked at the tree line to his left. Long, careful reading it, the way he read every environment, which was the same way he'd been reading it for 15 years. She doesn't react. She prepositions, which means she's already where we're going. "So we don't go there," Torres said. "Right," Reyes said. "We stop. We don't move. We let her commit to a position based on where she thinks we're headed, and then we go somewhere else." Ellison considered this. "That's assuming she doesn't just wait us out," he said. "She won't," Reyes said. "She's running multiple engagements. She can't stay static. She'll move when she thinks we've committed." "You figured this out from reading her file," Torres said. "I figured this out from watching the elimination log," Reyes said. "The timing. She's not wasting shots. She's not wasting movement. Everything she does has a downstream purpose, which means right now she's either using us to create a gap somewhere else on the board, or she's already finished with us and we just don't know it yet." The three of them stood in the cold and thought about that. "Either way, we're not shooting her," Torres said finally. "Probably not," Reyes admitted. "So what do we do?" Reyes looked at the tree line for another long moment. Then he did something that went against 17 years of SEAL instinct and training and the entire competitive architecture of his personality. "We stay still," he said, "and we document what we can. Because whatever she's doing, someone needs to be paying attention to it." Torres stared at him. "You're giving up." "I'm learning," Reyes said. "There's a difference." He pulled out his notebook, the same one he'd been using to track the betting pool, and he flipped to a clean page. And he started writing down everything he'd observed in the last 2 hours. Not tactics, not countermeasures, just observations. The pattern of the eliminations, the geometry of the approach angles, the timing, the absence of trace evidence. He wrote it for 6 minutes in the freezing cold while Torres watched him like he'd lost his mind, and Ellison quietly agreed with every word he was putting down. Then Reyes stopped writing and looked up and said, "She came from the left." "What?" Torres said. "She was here," Reyes said, pointing to a spot 12 feet to their left between 2 rock formations. "While I was writing, she was right there." "How do you know that?" "Because my file says I moved before I have to," Reyes said, "and she used that. She waited for me to go, still confirmed I'd stopped being a threat and moved past us." He looked at the space between the rocks. The snow was almost undisturbed. Almost. "There," Ellison said quietly, "the smallest impression, the faintest suggestion of weight and direction. Gone in another 30 seconds under the continuing snowfall." Torres looked at it. "She's unreal," he said. "No," Reyes said. "She's very, very real. That's the whole problem." At 0915, Holloway finally got his consolidation in Sector 5. 23 operators reorganized and furious, moving with the specific energy of men who had been handed an indignity they hadn't anticipated and were now deeply invested in correcting it. 9 eliminations in 3 hours against a single 18-year-old candidate. The mood in Sector 5 was not panic, not yet. It was the brittle, aggressive kind of focus that comes before panic, the last stage of denial, before the architecture of a man's self-image starts to show cracks. She's one person, someone said, one person with a rifle. We set a hard perimeter, overlapping fields of fire, no dead zones. She can't shoot through 23 operators. She shot through 9 of them without being seen, Webb said, and the room, the frozen open-air room of a Sector 5 rally point, went quiet. That's done, Holloway said. That was because we were spread out. Now we consolidate. Now we control the ground. Martinez was standing at the edge of the group saying nothing. He had been saying very little since the exercise began, which was not unusual for him. Martinez processed by watching, not talking, but there was a quality to his silence now that was different from his baseline. He was doing the same thing Reyes had done, except in his head instead of a notebook. He was tracking the pattern. He turned to Holloway. She's not coming to us, he said. She's one person with a rifle, Holloway said. She has to come to us eventually. No, Martinez said. She doesn't. She's already eliminated 9 operators without engaging any of them directly. She's not interested in our perimeter. She's not going to walk into a kill zone. Then what is she doing? Martinez looked at the tree line. She's waiting for us to create one for her, he said. Holloway stared at him. Say that again. We consolidate 23 people into one sector. We establish a perimeter. We feel safer. We get louder, not with sound, but with thermal signature radio traffic position tells. We think we're creating a trap. Martinez paused. We're creating a target. The silence that followed was the kind that changes the temperature of a conversation. So we don't consolidate, someone said. We can't split back up, Holloway said. We tried that. Then we move, Martinez said, constantly. No fixed position. We become as hard to pre-position against as she is. We'd be chasing her own methodology. Yes. Holloway thought about that for a long moment. Can we actually do that? Probably not as well as she does, Martinez said honestly, but better than standing still and waiting for her to pick the approach angle she wants. It was the most direct thing Martinez had said all morning. And the honesty of it, the complete absence of ego in the assessment, hit the group harder than any tactical argument could have. Holloway made the call. We move, he said. Constant rotation. No sector holds longer than 8 minutes. Kovacs, you run left column, Webb right. Martinez, you're with me in the center. We keep moving. And when we find her, someone asked. We don't find her, Martinez said. She finds us. The question is whether we're ready when she does. Nobody argued. At 0950, the storm intensified. The wind chill dropped to -38. Visibility in the open ground fell to 30 meters. The AI monitoring system compensated by switching its thermal nodes to a higher sensitivity setting, which meant it was now picking up heat signatures more accurately, but also generating more ambient noise in the data ice patches, animal movement, the geothermal variations in the frozen ground. In the monitoring station, the tech was managing the sensitivity adjustment when something caught his attention. Commander, Rivers looked up. There's a heat signature in Sector 2, the tech said. Stationary, has been for 11 minutes. Sector 2 is empty, Rivers said. We inserted no one there. I know, the tech said. They looked at each other. She's resting, Rivers said. Resting, the tech repeated. She ran 9 engaged us in the first 3 hours. She established position control across 4 sectors. Now she's letting the consolidation happen, letting them reorganize because she already knows what they're going to do, and she doesn't need to be moving to account for it. Rivers looked at the screen. She's resting, eating probably, staying warm, letting them burn energy chasing a pattern she's already finished running. The tech was quiet for a moment. That's terrifying, he said. That's doctrine, Rivers said. At 10:17, the 11th elimination was confirmed. Operator Castillo, Sector 5. He had broken from the moving column for 40 seconds to check a position marker, 40 seconds solo barely outside the perimeter, and the AI flagged him in the middle of that gap with a precision that made every other operator in the column stop moving and look at each other with an expression that had no name, but everyone recognized. She had waited for him to break. She had known or predicted or somehow anticipated that someone would break from the column, and she had been positioned for exactly that gap, 40 seconds. That was all she needed. Nobody breaks formation, Holloway said into the radio. His voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it, something that wasn't quite fear, but was the geological layer just below fear, the layer where certainty used to be. Nobody breaks formation, he said again. 3 minutes later, the radio crackled with a sound that nobody expected someone laughing. It was Reyes. Holloway, Reyes said, I need to tell you something. What? She was in Sector 8 20 minutes ago, within 12 feet of Torres Ellison and me. She confirmed we were neutralized not by the AI. She confirmed it herself, and she moved on. A pause. She didn't even bother to flag us. She just moved past, like we weren't worth the time. The radio was silent. Why are you laughing? Holloway said. 'Cause Reyes said, and his voice shifted into something complicated and genuine. I've been in this business for 15 years, and I have never once felt genuinely outclassed. And I am currently feeling genuinely outclassed by an 18-year-old in the middle of a snowstorm. And I think if I don't laugh about it, I'm going to have some kind of emotional event, and I'd rather not do that in front of Torres. I prefer that too, Torres said in the background. Holloway didn't laugh, but something in him, some very small thing, unlocked. We'll stay in Sector 8, he said. Hold your position. If you see anything, we're not going to see anything, Reyes said. That's kind of the whole point. But we'll stay. The line went quiet. Martinez looked at Holloway. She moved past them, he said, without engaging. She confirmed they were neutralized and moved on. Yeah. She's not trying to eliminate everyone, Martinez said slowly. She's trying to control everyone. There's a difference, Holloway looked at him. She's managing the board, Martinez said. The eliminations aren't the point. The point is knowing where everyone is and what they're going to do. Oh, well, the eliminations are just maintenance. He paused. She's been in command of this exercise since insertion. We've just been running her plays. Holloway stood in the moving column in the middle of Sector 5 in a blizzard and absorbed that sentence. Running her plays. 40 elite operators, 17 years of service in his case, 6 deployments, 42 combined medals in this group alone. Running the plays of an 18-year-old girl who had shown up the night before with a rifle too big for her frame and eyes that didn't blink. We need to stop being predictable, he said. We need to stop, Martinez said simply. Stop what? Moving, Martinez said. Reacting, adjusting. Every time we make a decision, we're giving her data. Every time we change our plan, we're confirming what she already predicted about how we'd change our plan. The only move she can't anticipate is the move we haven't decided on yet. You want us to do nothing. I want us to make her work for it, Martinez said. Really work, not react to us, hunt us. Because right now she's not hunting, she's managing. And managed prey is easy prey. Holloway thought about this for a long time. Long enough that the column had moved half a sector's distance, and Kovacs was looking back at him with the expression of a man waiting for orders that weren't coming. Then Holloway made the hardest call of his career. Not the most dangerous, not the most consequential, but the hardest because it required him to do the thing that 17 years of training and temperament and identity had made nearly impossible. He stopped. He stopped making decisions. He told the column to go still, and he waited. At 11:03, the AI monitoring system flagged something it had never flagged in any prior exercise run by any team at Fort Kodiak. A position change. Not an elimination. Not a contact. A position change for the shooter. The AI running its thermal backtrack confirmed that the previously stationary signature in Sector 2 had moved. It had moved towards Sector 5. Not around Sector 5, not past Sector 5, toward it. The tech stared at the screen. She's moving toward the consolidation, he said. I know, Rivers said, but they've gone still. They stopped reacting. She doesn't know where Asian. She knows, Rivers said. Yeah. How Rivers looked at the screen. He looked at the position of the column, the stillness of it, the tight formation of 22 operators who had stopped trying to outrun a methodology they didn't understand and had instead done something far more dangerous. Because going still was also predictable, he said. She knew Holloway would eventually run out of adjustments. She planned for the moment they stopped. He paused. She's been moving since 11:01. She was ahead of the decision by 2 minutes. The tech looked at the screen for a long moment. She planned for them to stop planning, he said. Yes, Rivers said. That's her father's doctrine, Rivers said. planned for every reaction, including the absence of one. At 11:09, Raymond Martinez felt it first. Not heard, not saw. Felt that particular frequency change in the air around a position when something with intent moves into proximity. He had felt it twice in his career under live fire conditions, and both times it had saved his life. And he had never been able to explain it to anyone because it wasn't doctrine and it wasn't training. It was just the thing that happens when a human body has been in enough dangerous situations that it starts processing information the conscious mind doesn't have access to yet. He put his hand on Holloway's arm. Holloway looked at him. Martinez didn't say anything. He just looked at the tree line to the north of their position. Holloway looked. 22 operators looked. Nothing. Snow, wind, the gray-white silence of a blizzard at full strength. And then so small, so brief, that half of them weren't sure they saw it. A branch moved. Not in the direction of the wind, perpendicular to it. Martinez opened his mouth. The AI flagged 2 eliminations simultaneously. Operators Webb and Kovacs, both at the left and right edges of the column. Both flanking positions. Both taken in the same second from angles that had required pre-positioning at least 20 minutes before the column went still. 20 minutes before Holloway made the decision to stop. She had placed those shots before the decision existed. The column stood in silence for 3 seconds that felt like 3 minutes. Then Martinez said very quietly, "She's here." And every single remaining operator looked at the tree line and understood in the full and complete and irreversible way of men who have been shown something true that the thing they were looking at was not empty. It never had been. 20 operators left. That number sat in Derek Holloway's chest like a piece of shrapnel. Not killing him, but impossible to ignore. Impossible to move around without feeling it. 20 operators out of 40. Half his platoon gone in under 5 hours, and the only proof that Ava Hale existed at all was a series of AI flags on a monitoring screen and a branch that had moved in the wrong direction. He didn't speak for almost 30 seconds after the Webb and Kovacs eliminations were confirmed. The remaining 20 operators stood in the blizzard and waited for him to say something, and the waiting itself was its own kind of damage. 20 men who had never needed to wait for certainty before suddenly standing in it like water they didn't know how to swim through. "Tighten up," Holloway finally said. His voice was flat and controlled and completely committed to sounding like a man who still had a plan. "Center formation, nobody on the edges, we move as one unit." Nobody argued. That was new. An hour ago, half of them would have pushed back on the formation call, offered alternatives, made the case for their own rate of the situation. Now they just moved, because arguing required a certain confidence in your own judgment, and their collective judgment had just spent 5 hours being quietly, methodically, and visibly dismantled. Martinez fell in beside Holloway without being asked. "She placed those shots 20 minutes before we stopped moving." Holloway said low enough that only Martinez could hear. "I know. She predicted the decision I hadn't made yet. I know. How do you fight that?" Martinez was quiet for a moment. The column moved through the blizzard, tight and deliberate, every man watching his sector with the specific focus of people who have learned that inattention has a cost. "You don't fight it," Martinez said. "You accept that she's running a different game, and you try to find the one thing she can't account for." "Which is what?" "I don't know yet," Martinez said. "But it exists. Nobody's methodology is airtight." Holloway looked at him. "You sound almost like you respect her." "I do respect her," Martinez said simply. "I've been in this business long enough to recognize mastery when I'm standing inside it. She's running a battlefield with 20 operators left, and she hasn't broken a sweat. That deserves respect. Respect doesn't win exercises." "No," Martinez agreed, "but arrogance loses them. And we've been losing since 0600 because of arrogance. Respect is at least honest." At 11:27, the AI flagged its 13th elimination. Operator Briggs II. Briggs on the team, a quiet man from Georgia who had never said much, and was now saying nothing permanently as far as the exercise was concerned, went down in Sector 4. Edge of the moving column, the AI flagged the approach angle as coming from directly above, from a position in the rock formation that the column had passed 90 seconds earlier. She had been above them. While they were moving through, she had been lying flat on the ice shelf overhead, watching them pass, and she had waited. Waited until the column had cleared the formation, waited until the last man in line had relaxed his backward coverage, because the formation was past the obstacle, and then she had taken the shot. From behind, from above, from a position she'd been in when they walked under her. The column stopped. Every man looked up instinctively, the useless human reflex of looking for something that was no longer there. She was above us, someone said. The voice belonged to a SEAL named Hargrove, and the way he said it, quiet, almost reverential, like a man reading from a text he doesn't fully understand, captured something that was moving through the group like weather. It wasn't panic. Panic is loud. This was something quieter. It was the feeling of a room tilting, not falling, just tilting, and everyone trying to find the new floor. Keep moving, Holloway said. Where? Hargrove said. It was a genuine question, not a challenge. Where as in, where do we go that she isn't already waiting? Where do we move that isn't already on her map? Where in 12 miles of terrain she knows better than we do, is there a position that belongs to us and not to her? Holloway didn't have an answer. And the fact that he didn't, that the question sat between them without a response for 2 full seconds, was its own kind of confirmation. Forward, he said. We keep moving forward. At 11:41, Reyes's voice came back on the radio. He and Torres and Ellison had been holding in Sector 8, not engaging, not moving, doing exactly what Reyes had decided, documenting, observing, trying to understand the pattern from the outside. And in the 40 minutes since Holloway had told them to stay put, Reyes had filled 6 pages of his notebook and arrived at something. Holloway, he said, I need you to listen to me. Go ahead. I've been tracking the elimination sequence, the timing the approach angles the sectors. I think I understand what she's doing. The column stopped moving, not because Holloway ordered it, because every man on the channel went instinctively still to hear this. Talk, Holloway said. She's not eliminating randomly. She's eliminating in a sequence that creates pressure points. She takes out flank coverage first, then communication nodes, then the center. But she doesn't do it all at once. She does it in waves with rest periods in between where she's watching how we respond. Reyes paused, and then she adjusts the next wave based on our response. She's adapting in real time. She's been adapting in real time since insertion. But here's the thing, the adjustments aren't reactive. They're predictive. She's not watching us and changing her plan. She's watching us confirm which of her pre-made plans is the right one. A pause. She already made 12 plans before she stepped into the tree line. She's just been selecting between them as we give her data. The radio was quiet. 12 plans, Martinez said. At minimum, Reyes said. Maybe more. How do you know, Joaquin? Because the transitions between her waves are too smooth. There's no hesitation. When we consolidate, she doesn't need to think about what to do next. She just switches to the plan she already made for a consolidation scenario. Reyes's voice shifted. She prepared for every decision we were going to make, every one, including the ones we thought were unpredictable. Holloway stood in the blizzard and let that land. Can we do something she didn't plan for? He said. A long pause. Theoretically, Reyes said, but it would have to be something genuinely outside our training, something none of us have done before, something she couldn't find in our files because we haven't done it. What would that look like? I have no idea, Reyes said. And that's the problem, because the things I don't know I can do are also the things I don't know I can do. The radio clicked off. Martinez looked at Holloway. He's right, he said. I know he's right, Holloway said. That doesn't help me. It helps you understand what you're dealing with, Martinez said. That's the first step. The first step toward what? Martinez was quiet for a moment. Toward not making it worse, he said. At 12:03, the storm reached its full intensity. Visibility dropped to 15 meters. Wind gusts were hitting 50 miles per hour. The AI monitoring system's thermal nodes were compensating as best they could, but the data was noisier now. More gaps, more uncertainty in positional tracking. Rivers was running continuous calibration checks on the system, making sure the elimination confirmations were clean. The remaining 19 operators were clustered in Sector 5, moving in the tight, controlled formation Holloway had established. They had gone 12 minutes without an elimination. 12 minutes of silence from the AI, which should have felt like relief and instead felt like the held breath before something loud. Hargrove said it first. She stopped. Or we stopped being interesting, Torres said over the radio from Sector 8. Same thing, Reyes said. Is it? Hargrove said. Maybe she's running out of positions. Maybe the storm is limiting her movement too. She grew up in this, Martinez said. Not harshly, just factually the way he said most things. Her father built a doctrine specifically for these conditions. This storm isn't limiting her. It's her home terrain. The silence that followed was absolute. Then at 12:09, Raymond Martinez did something he had been considering for the last 40 minutes. He stepped out of the formation. Not far. 2 steps, enough to separate himself from the column's silhouette. Martinez, Holloway said. I'm going to try something, Martinez said. Don't. She avoids wasted shots, Martinez said. She hasn't taken an engagement that she didn't already know the outcome of. She plans, she prepositions, she confirms before she commits. He looked at the tree line. I'm going to give her a target she can't preposition for, something genuinely unpredictable. What does that mean? It means I'm going to move like I don't know what I'm doing, Martinez said. No pattern, no doctrine, random direction changes, random speeds, no tactical logic. The one thing she can't predict is something with no internal logic because there's no file on someone who's abandoned their training. Holloway stared at him. That's insane. That's the point, Martinez said. I'm going to make myself the one variable she can't account for. Or you're going to get eliminated in 30 seconds. Probably, Martinez said, but at minimum I'll learn something. He paused. And if it works, if she has to move to find me, if I make her react instead of anticipate, you'll know where she is. Holloway held his gaze for a long moment. And then what, he said. Even if we find her position, then we know something real, Martinez said. Right now we know nothing real. We know flags on a screen and branches moving in the wrong direction. I want to make actual contact. I want to see her. There was something in the way he said it, not aggressive, not competitive, just honest, that made several operators around him go quiet in a different way than they'd been quiet before. This was the quiet of recognition. Martinez wasn't trying to win. He was trying to understand. Go, Holloway said. Martinez went. He moved like a man who had deliberately forgotten 15 years of training, left when doctrine said, right stopped, when momentum said go changed elevation at random intervals, cut back across his own path in ways that created no readable signature. It looked wrong. It looked like a man who was lost or injured or genuinely confused. And for 3 minutes, nothing happened. 3 minutes of Martinez making no tactical sense in the middle of a blizzard, while 19 operators watched the tree line and the AI screen and waited. Then at 12:14, something happened that had not happened once in 8 hours of exercise. The AI detected movement from the shooter's position. Not an elimination flag, a position shift, a reactive position shift, the system's thermal backtrack, showing a heat signature moving in response to an external variable. Moving to find a new angle. Moving because the existing pre-positioned angles didn't cover the pattern Martinez was running. She was reacting. For the first time all day, she was reacting. Back at the monitoring station, Rivers sat forward in his chair. She moved, the tech said, his voice carrying something that was almost excitement. Yes, Rivers said. He made her move. The random pattern, she didn't have a pre-made plan for it. She has one now, Rivers said, but for 30 seconds she had to think instead of select. 30 seconds, the tech said. In her methodology, that's an eternity, Rivers said. At 12:15, the AI flagged Martinez. One shot, clean. The approach angle was from the northwest. She had moved 140 meters in under 2 minutes to find the one geometry that covered his unpredictable path. 140 meters in a blizzard uphill in under 2 minutes, and the shot was still clean. But Martinez was smiling when the AI flag lit up on his gear. He keyed his radio. Northwest, he said. She's in the northwest. She moved to find me. We see it on the AI, Holloway said. She moved, Martinez said. That matters. It matters that she adapted in 2 minutes and still eliminated you, Hargrove said. It matters that she had to adapt at all, Martinez said. Reyes was right. She had 12 plans. We found the edge of them. Over the radio, Reyes said very quietly, "Well done, Chief." Martinez sat down in the snow where the AI had flagged him officially eliminated and looked at the northwest tree line with an expression that was not defeat and was not satisfaction, but was something in between, the specific feeling of a man who has just learned something real about something he couldn't understand before, and who knows that the learning cost something but was worth it. At 12:22, Holloway made his move toward the northwest. 18 operators moving fast now using the AI's confirmed position shift as a directional anchor driving toward the sector where Martinez had pushed her. It was the most aggressive thing Holloway had done all day, a full commitment, everything forward, abandoning the cautious formation work and betting on speed. He was betting she hadn't had time to reestablish multiple prepositions. He was betting wrong, but he didn't know it yet. What he did know, what every one of his 18 operators knew, was that something had shifted. Not in the tactical situation, not in the numbers. The numbers were still catastrophic: 22 eliminations, 18 remaining, one shooter unconfirmed. What had shifted was in the feeling of the thing. Martinez had made her move. The invulnerability, that specific suffocating sense that she was operating outside the rules of the game everyone else was playing, had cracked. Not broken, cracked. One hairline fracture in the certainty of her. And sometimes a hairline fracture is enough. At 12:31, the AI flagged two more eliminations. Operators Okafor and Stills leading the advanced column Sector 7. She'd been waiting on the route they chose, not the route she'd been pushed to, but the route they'd used to get there. She had predicted the direction of their advance and placed herself on the path of it, not the origin of it. She hadn't just adapted. She had anticipated the adaptation. 16 operators left. Holloway stopped the advance. "She saw us coming," Hargrove said. "She saw us coming before we decided to come," Holloway said. The column stood in the blizzard and nobody spoke. The AI screen on the monitoring unit showed 16 green dots clustered in the space between sectors 5 and 7, and somewhere in the white noise of the storm, one other heat signature moving with the quiet, unhurried purpose of something that understood the territory better than the people inside it. At 12:45, Reyes said something over the radio that nobody expected. "I want to ask her something," he said. "She's not on our channel," Torres said. "She might be listening," Reyes said. "Her father built this program. She knows how the monitoring system works. She probably has access to the channel." The radio was quiet. "Ava," Reyes said, clearly, directly, using her name for the first time, not candidate, not the girl, not she, her name. "I want you to know that I've been taking notes, and I think what you're doing is the most sophisticated thing I've ever seen on a training exercise. And I know you probably don't care what I think, but I want to ask you one question." Silence. Snow, wind, and then quiet as the snow itself, a voice on the channel. "Ask," she said. Every operator on this channel went completely still. Holloway's hand tightened on his weapon without him deciding to tighten it. The tech at the monitoring station looked at Rivers with wide eyes. Rivers didn't react at all, like he'd been waiting for this. "Was any of this ever in doubt for you?" Reyes said. "From your side, was there any point today where you thought this might not work?" A pause, long enough that Reyes thought she'd gone. "Then Sector 8, when you stopped moving and went still, I didn't have an approach angle on Torres that didn't risk the creek crossing." Another pause. "I recalculated for 4 minutes. 4 minutes, Reyes said. "It's a long time," she said. "Yeah," he said. "It is." Silence. Then Holloway, his voice carrying something it hadn't carried all morning. Not authority, not command, just the plain sound of a man speaking honestly. "How old were you when you started this?" 12, she said. "Your father taught you." "My father built it," she said. "He taught me to be better than it." The radio clicked off. 16 operators stood in the blizzard and held that sentence in the cold. At 12:58, the AI flagged a movement pattern that Rivers had been watching develop for the last 20 minutes. He had seen it before, not in training, not in evaluation, but in the records her father had left behind. Records that Rivers had read so many times in the 3 years since the program's founder had died that he could recite them from memory. The pattern was called a collapse point. It was the final phase of the Winter Phantom Doctrine, the phase that came after control, after selection, after attrition. The phase where all the positioned elements and all the created pressures were allowed to converge on a single geographic point at a single moment, like water that had been building behind a dam for hours, suddenly finding the one crack it had been slowly and visibly widening all along. She was setting up the collapse. Rivers looked at the positions of the remaining 16 operators. He looked at the terrain data. He looked at the approach angles she had established over the last 6 hours. He saw it. He saw the shape of what was about to happen, and he said nothing, because this was the evaluation, and the evaluation required him to watch. At 1:04, Holloway saw it too. Not the full picture, not the doctrine, but the shape, the way the pressure points she'd created over 6 hours were suddenly all pointing in the same direction like arrows on a map that had seemed random until you stepped back and saw they were all pointing at the same thing. "She's hurting us," he said. Martinez's voice from the eliminated channel. "What?" "She's not chasing us," Holloway said. "She never was. She's been positioning us. Every consolidation, every formation change, every advance and retreat, she's been moving us. Like livestock." The word tasted bitter, and he said it anyway because it was the right word. "She's moving us towards something." "Where?" Hargrove said. Holloway looked at the terrain, looked at the way the pressure points had built, looked at the direction they'd been consistently pushed in over the last 3 hours through all their decisions and counter-decisions and adaptations. "The ice flat," he said. "Sector 9, the open ground near the frozen lake." Silence. "Why there?" someone said. "Because it's the one place in 12 miles where there's no cover," Holloway said. "No rock formations, no trees, no elevation variance. Just open ice and wind." He paused. "And it's where we're going to end up if we keep responding to her the way we've been responding." "Then we don't go there," Hargrove said. "She's already planned for that," Holloway said. "She's planned for us going there, and she's planned for us refusing to go there." He looked at the tree line. He looked at the blizzard. He looked at the 16 men around him who had been some of the best operators in the world this morning and were now standing in a storm being herded by a girl who wasn't old enough to rent a car. And something in Derek Holloway, something deep and structural, something he'd been carrying since 0500, when he looked at her across the briefing room and made his calculation and found it so conclusive, he almost felt sorry for her, finally quietly broke. Not his discipline, not his command authority, not his ability to function, just the certainty, just the specific, comfortable 17-year-old certainty that he knew the shape of things, that he could look at a situation and know immediately and correctly what it was and what it meant and what was going to happen. That certainty was gone, and what replaced it slowly, reluctantly, with the particular discomfort of a man putting on clothes that don't fit yet, was something that might in time become something better. "We're going to the ice flat," he said. "What?" Hargrove said. "We're going," Holloway said, "because she's planned for us refusing and she's planned for us complying. And between those two options, complying gets us to the same place faster and faster means this ends before we lose anyone else to the cold." He paused. "And because I want to see her." Like Martinez, he wanted to see her. Not to win, not to counter. Just to see the thing that had been running invisible through his exercise for 6 hours and turned 40 elite operators into a lesson he was only beginning to understand the shape of. The 16 men looked at him. Then they started moving toward the ice flat. Above them, in a position that covered 3 approach routes simultaneously and had been established 40 minutes before Holloway made the call, Ava Hale watched them come. She did not feel triumph. She did not feel relief. She felt the specific, quiet, completely focused feeling of a doctrine working exactly as her father had designed it, not as a weapon, not as a competition, but as a proof that the right understanding of terrain and human nature and patience could do what no amount of firepower or physical dominance could do alone. She watched them come, and for the first time since 0600, she let them see her. Not completely, not recklessly, but enough. A silhouette against the gray sky for half a second on the ridge above the ice flat before she dropped back into the terrain. Enough that Holloway saw it, enough that he stopped walking and looked up and saw the shape of her small, precise, unhurried for just a moment before the blizzard swallowed her again. He stood there. The column stopped behind him. He had been wrong about so many things today. He had been wrong about what she was, and wrong about what it meant, and wrong about what strength looked like, and wrong about what mastery required. He had made his calculation at 0500, and it had been so wrong, so completely and fundamentally wrong, that the wrongness of it had taken 6 hours and 24 eliminations to fully reveal itself. He was still processing it. He suspected he would be processing it for a long time. "She let us see her," Hargrove said. "Yes," Holloway said. "Why, Paul?" Holloway watched the ridge where she'd been. He thought about the profile he'd built in his head over 17 years, the profile of what a threat looked like, what competence looked like, what someone worth taking seriously looked like. He thought about how completely and absolutely she had failed to match that profile. And he thought about how that failure had been his, not hers. Because she wanted us to know it was a choice, he said. The wind howled across the ice flat. Somewhere in the blizzard, something that moved like the storm itself was already setting up the next position. And 16 of the best trained operators in the world walked toward the ice flat with the specific feeling of men who have learned something enormous at enormous cost and are only now beginning to understand what they're going to do with it. The ice flat in Sector 9 was 300 meters of open frozen ground with the wind cutting across it at 40 miles an hour and nothing between you and the sky except cold. 16 operators walked onto it in tight formation, and every single one of them knew in the professional, experiential, bone-deep way of men who have spent careers reading terrain that this was the worst possible ground to fight on. No cover, no elevation, no angles except the ones she chose from the ridges surrounding it on three sides. They walked onto it anyway, because Holloway had said so, and because somewhere between Sector 5 and Sector 9, the nature of his authority had shifted. Not weakened, but changed. He wasn't leading them toward victory anymore. He was leading them toward whatever came next, and they followed. Because men like these follow leaders who are honest about what they're walking into, even when what they're walking into is bad. She's on one of three ridges, Hargrove said, keeping his voice low and controlled. North, northeast, or east. The west approach is too exposed for her own movement. She knows we know that, Holloway said, so she's not on the west. She's probably not on any of the three we'd pick first, Holloway said. He had stopped trying to outthink her in the way he'd been outthinking opponents his whole career. The aggressive assumption-first tactical logic that had served him for 17 years. Instead, he was trying to think around her, which was different and harder and felt wrong in his hands like a tool he hadn't learned to use yet. She'll be on the one we dismiss, South Martinez said from the eliminated channel. He was still listening, which was irregular, which Rivers was allowing because Rivers was allowing a lot of things today that weren't in the standard evaluation protocol. South and Martinez repeated, you dismiss the South approach because the angle is shallow. But a shallow angle is fine if you're not trying to eliminate from a distance, if you're trying to watch, to manage, to see the whole flat. Holloway stopped walking. He turned and looked at the southern ridge. It was lower than the others, less dramatic. The kind of high ground that tactical minds skip because it doesn't offer the dominant angle you want for a shot. But it offered something else entirely, a complete view of all three other ridges simultaneously, plus the full expanse of the flat, plus the approach routes from Sectors 5 and 7. From the South Ridge, you didn't control the ground. You controlled the information. She's not shooting from there, Holloway said slowly. She's watching from there. She's commanding from there, Martinez said. Same thing. No, Martinez said. Commanding is different. She's not managing the exercise from a shooting position. She's managing it from a command position. Like a general, not a sniper. The word landed on the ice flat and the wind took it and everyone heard it. A general. Not a sniper candidate, not a girl with a rifle. A general running a campaign from a command position with 16 remaining units moving exactly where she had decided they would move. Hargrove said what everyone was thinking. Then what are we? Nobody answered. At 1:23, the ambush they had been building for the past 40 minutes was finally ready. It had been Hargrove's plan, the last genuine tactical idea anyone had brought to the table, and it was good work. Real work. The kind of coordinated multi-element trap that Delta Team had trained to execute with precision. The setup was this: 6 operators in concealed positions on the North Ridge, using the rock formations for cover and sight lines down to the flat. 4 operators moving as visible bait across the center of the flat, deliberate slow, making themselves seen. 6 more in a horseshoe formation around the southern base of the ridge, positioned to close on any approach route from the south. It was a classic squeeze play. Bait draws attention. Flanks close. The thing you're hunting has nowhere to go. It's solid, Reyes said over the radio from Sector 8. But, Torres said, but she's going to see it. She'll see the bait, Hargrove said. That's the point. She's supposed to see the bait. She'll see the whole thing, Reyes said. The 6 on the North Ridge, the horseshoe on the south. She reads formations the way you and I read faces. She'll know what it is in 30 seconds. Then why bother? Someone said. Because Holloway said she knows we know that she'll see it, and she knows we're doing it anyway, which means she has to decide which version of the plan we're actually running, the one she sees or the one we're hiding inside it. Silence. Are we hiding one inside it? Hargrove said. I don't know yet, Holloway said, but she doesn't know that I don't know, and that uncertainty, that's the first genuine uncertainty we've introduced all day. It wasn't brilliant. He knew that. It wasn't the kind of tactical masterstroke that wins evaluations in the textbooks. But it was real and it was honest, and it was the best thing he had left. He was running a trap that he wasn't sure he fully understood himself against someone who would see it coming. And the only card he had was that the trap's incompleteness was genuine and therefore unpredictable. He keyed the radio. Execute, he said. The 4 bait operators moved onto the center of the flat. At 1:27, the first unexpected thing happened. Nothing. For 4 minutes, the bait moved across the open ground, and the AI monitoring system showed no movement from the shooter's position, no approach angle change, no indication that she was responding to the trap at all. The Northridge operators held their positions. The horseshoe held the south base, and the 4 men on the flat walked slowly, deliberately, and completely without incident. Hargrove keyed the radio. She's not taking it. I see that, Holloway said. She's letting them walk. I see that too. Why isn't she? Because the bait isn't what she's interested in, Holloway said. And then with the specific feeling of a man stepping on ice that he's not sure will hold, we're the bait. The radio was quiet. Say that again, Hargrove said. We put 4 men in the open and 16 in concealed positions. She sees it. She knows the 4 are bait, so she ignores the 4. Holloway's voice was very controlled, and she looks at where the 16 are hiding. And the 16 us in our concealed positions, we're giving her exactly what she needed. What did we give her? Our positions, Holloway said. She didn't know where we all were before this. We were moving unpredictable, scattered. But now we've put ourselves in fixed, concealed positions and held them for 4 minutes. We gave her a static target. The horror of it moved through the radio channel like something physical. They had built a trap, and the trap was for themselves. At 1:31, the AI flagged 3 simultaneous eliminations. Northridge, all 3 from different approach angles, all flagged within 8 seconds of each other, all from positions that required pre-established shooting solutions, aimed not at the open flat, but at the concealed positions on the ridge itself. She hadn't targeted the bait. She had targeted the hunters. 13 operators left. Hargrove's voice, when it came back on the channel, was the voice of a man who had just watched something he'd built get turned inside out. She used our own plan against him, he said. She used our own instincts against us, Holloway said. The plan was just the instinct made visible. At 1:34, the second unexpected thing happened. A sound, not a shot, not a flag, a sound, the specific wrong sound of ice giving way under concentrated weight and sudden force somewhere on the eastern edge of the flat. Then voices, not tactical voices, not combat voices. Voices with urgency in them. The kind of urgency that has nothing to do with the exercise and everything to do with something real. Man down, non-exercise, emergency Crawford is through the ice. Holloway was moving before the sentence finished. The eastern edge of the flat bordered the frozen lake, and what nobody had flagged in the terrain briefing, or what had been flagged but overlooked, was that the ice thickness varied dramatically along the shoreline. The kind of variance that a topographic map doesn't always capture. The kind of variance that an 18-year-old who had grown up studying this specific doctrine in this specific type of terrain would know and account for and stay away from. Sergeant Lucas Crawford had not stayed away from it. He had been part of the horseshoe formation on the south base, and in repositioning after the Northridge eliminations, he had cut across the lake edge and the ice had given way, and he was in the water now, freezing water, under a broken ice shelf with one arm hooked over the edge, and 2 other operators flat on their stomachs on the intact ice reaching for him. Holloway hit the ice flat at a run. Medevac, I need a medevac call to the monitoring station now. Non-exercise emergency? He keyed the direct channel to Rivers. Commander, Crawford is through the ice on the eastern lake edge. We need medevac. Rivers was already moving. The monitoring station had thermal coverage of the lake edge, and the alert had triggered 20 seconds before Holloway's call. He was on the emergency frequency before Holloway finished speaking. Medevac en route, Rivers said. ETA 11 minutes. Keep him out of full submersion. Keep him talking. 11 minutes in negative 35-degree wind chill with a man partially submerged in frozen water. 11 minutes was the distance between a bad day and a catastrophe. Holloway reached the lake edge, threw himself flat, reached for Crawford alongside the two operators who were already there. Crawford was holding, barely. His face was white-gray and his grip on the ice edge was weakening, the cold. Did that fast stole muscle function before you felt it going? Stay with me, Holloway said. Crawford, look at me. Crawford's eyes found him. I'm looking, Crawford said. His voice was wrong, too slow, too thin, the voice of a body already redirecting resources away from the periphery. Good, keep looking, we've got you. They pulled. 3 men flat on the ice pulling against the weight of a man in waterlogged gear, in freezing water, and the ice kept taking their leverage, kept threatening to give under the combined weight, kept making the whole situation more precarious with each second. At 1:37, something changed on the eastern approach. Movement, fast, silent, purposeful, coming from the southern ridge at a speed that shouldn't have been possible in those conditions over that terrain. Hargrove saw it first. Contact, he said automatically, weapon coming up. Hold, Holloway said without looking up from Crawford. Non-exercise. Hold your fire. The movement reached the lake edge and went flat beside Holloway in one fluid motion, and Derek Holloway turned his head and found himself looking at Ava Hale from a distance of approximately 2 feet. Up close, she was exactly as real as he should have expected her to be, and somehow hadn't. Real in the specific way of someone who has been running at full capacity for 7 hours in a blizzard and is still completely controlled, breathing hard, yes, ice crusted on the front of her jacket, from a position she'd been holding, but present, focused, completely and entirely present in the way of someone for whom the shift from exercise to emergency required no mental transition at all. She didn't look at Holloway, she looked at Crawford. She looked at the ice, at the angle, at the two operators holding position. She processed the geometry of the situation in approximately 3 seconds, and then she said to no one specifically, and everyone simultaneously, roll left, both of you, redistribute the weight to the right edge. The ice is thicker there by 8 inches. Holloway didn't ask how she knew. He rolled left. The other operators rolled left. She came in from the right edge, moving with a precision that distributed her weight across the most stable section, and she reached Crawford's other arm, and she pulled. She pulled like she meant it. Together, they got him out. Not gracefully, not easily. It took 90 seconds that felt like 9 minutes, and Crawford said absolutely nothing the entire time because he was past the point of speech, which was his own kind of alarm. But they got him out of the water and onto the stable ice, and Ava was already pulling the emergency thermal blanket from the medical kit on her belt before Crawford's legs were fully clear. Holloway watched her work. She moved around Crawford with the same efficiency she had moved through 12 miles of wilderness for 7 hours. No wasted motion, no hesitation, no performance. She knew exactly what needed to happen, and she did it in the order it needed to happen, and she talked to Crawford the whole time in a voice that was steady and direct and gave him something to hold on to while his body figured out whether to keep running. Stay awake, she said, eyes open. Tell me your daughter's name. Crawford blinked. What? Your daughter, her name, tell me. Emma, Crawford said. Ma Grace. How old? 7. She's 7, boyin. Good, Ava said. Think about Emma Grace. Keep thinking about her. We're going to get you warm, and you're going to go home and see her. Holloway was very still. He knew from the personnel files that Crawford had a daughter named Emma. He did not know that Ava knew this, but of course she did. She had read 42 personnel files. She had read them completely and carefully and retained what mattered, and what mattered was what the men had to come home to. She had known Crawford had a daughter named Emma, and she had used that knowledge not as leverage, not as tactical information, but as an anchor, something real and warm to hold on to in the freezing cold. At 1:46, the medevac helicopter arrived. It set down on the stable ice 40 meters from where Crawford was, lying wrapped in the thermal blanket, still conscious, his color beginning to come back in small increments that everyone around him was tracking, with the intensity of people who have decided that this particular data point matters more than anything else happening right now. The medical team came off the helicopter fast and took over, And Crawford was loaded and secured in under 3 minutes, and the helicopter was gone, rising back into the blizzard with a sound that faded quickly and left behind a silence that was different from all the previous silences of the day. Holloway stood on the ice and watched the helicopter disappear. Then he turned around. Ava was still there, standing 6 feet away, rifle on her back, hands at her sides, watching him with the same gray-green eyes that had looked at him across the briefing room at 0500 with complete and total calm. They looked at each other. "You didn't have to come," he said. "No," she said. "You were mid-exercise. You had a clean position on the South Ridge. You could have—" "I know what I could have done," she said. Holloway nodded slowly. "Why didn't you?" She was quiet for a moment, just long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said, "Because my father built this program to produce operators who survive the impossible, not operators who win exercises." Holloway held that. "Those are different things," he said. "Yes," she said, "they are." Around them, the remaining 13 operators had gathered without anyone calling them together. They had simply drifted inward the way people do when something real happens, and the artificial structures of protocol and competition fall away. Hargrove was there. Torres was there. The 4 bait operators who had walked across the flat untouched were there. All of them standing in the blizzard on the ice of the frozen lake, looking at the girl who had spent 7 hours dismantling them with a precision that still didn't have a name in any doctrine they'd been trained on, and had then set all of it aside without a second's hesitation to pull one of them out of the water. Rhea's voice came over the radio, soft. "Is Crawford stable?" "Medevac took him," Holloway said. "He's stable." "Good," Rhea said. A pause. "Is she still there?" Holloway looked at Ava. "Yes," he said. "Tell her something for me," Rhea said. "Go ahead. Tell her she won. Tell her she won 7 hours ago and she's been demonstrating it since. And tell her that the thing she just did, pulling Crawford, that's the part that matters. The part I'm going to remember." Holloway looked at Ava. She was looking at the ice where the medevac had been. Her expression was not pride and it was not modesty. It was something more specific than either the expression of someone for whom the right action and the difficult action are the same action and always have been, who does not experience them as a choice so much as a fact. He told her what Rhea said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My father used to say that the difference between a weapon and a warrior is what they protect." The wind moved across the flat and the snow fell and nobody spoke. At 1:59, Derek Holloway made a decision. He keyed the channel that it connected to the AI monitoring system's administrative override, the channel that allowed a unit commander to call an end to an exercise under non-standard conditions. He had the authority, he had the cause. Crawford's emergency had created exactly the kind of exceptional circumstance the protocol was designed for. He held the key. He looked at his 13 remaining operators. He looked at Ava. Then he released the key without transmitting. "We finish it," he said. Hargrove stared at him. "Why, because she deserves a real ending," Holloway said. "Not an administrative call, not a protocol termination. She spent 7 hours giving us a real exercise, and we're going to give her a real conclusion." He looked at Ava. "That's your call," he said. "You're the one running this. Do you want to continue?" She looked at the 13 remaining operators. She looked at Holloway. She looked at the blizzard, which had not lessened and was not going to lessen. The storm had another 6 hours in it at minimum, and the temperature was still dropping, and every man standing on this ice had been in the field for over 7 hours in conditions that were objectively dangerous. "Yes," she said. Holloway nodded. "Then we continue," he said. He looked at his team. "Formation, we're going back to the flat." At 2:03, the exercise resumed, and something had changed. Not in Ava's methodology, she returned to the position she'd established before the Crawford emergency with the smooth efficiency of someone picking up a sentence they'd paused mid-word. Not in the AI system, which resumed tracking and flagging without comment. Not in the physical conditions, which were as brutal as they'd been all day. What changed was in the 13 operators who walked back onto the ice flat and took their positions. They moved differently. Not better necessarily, not with greater tactical sophistication or more refined doctrine, but differently with a quality of attention that hadn't been there before. A kind of honest, clear-eyed focus that comes to people when the pretense has been stripped away and what's left is just the work and what the work means. They had been humbled. They had been methodically and completely and thoroughly humbled by something they hadn't been equipped to recognize. And on the far side of that humbling was not shame, or not only shame, but something that functioned more like clarity. Hargrove set up his position with more care than he'd used all day. Torres moved with his eyes open in a different way, not just scanning for threat, but reading the terrain the way Reyes had described, looking for the logic of it, the shape of what it offered and what it denied. Even the two youngest operators, Castillo and one other who had been eliminated early watching from the sidelines of the exercise's final act, were paying attention differently. At 2:14, she took out two more. Flanking positions as expected, she never left flanks uncollapsed. It was doctrine, her father's doctrine, protect the center by eliminating the edges first. 11 remaining. At 2:21, she took out three more in a sequence so fast the AI flags came within 15 seconds of each other. 8 remaining. The speed was different now. She was compressing the timeline not because she was in a hurry, but because the end phase of the doctrine ran at a different tempo than the control phase. The control phase was patient and invisible. The end phase was definitive. Holloway felt it. She's closing, he said. I know, Hargrove said. She's going to come through the north approach. It's the only angle that lets her cover all 8 positions simultaneously. Then we cover the north approach. She knows we'll cover the north approach, Holloway said. Then we cover it anyway, Holloway said, because it's the right thing to do, and we do the right thing even when it doesn't work. That's what we are. They covered the north approach. She came from the south. Not because the south was tactically superior to the north, it wasn't. Holloway had been right about that. But because she had heard him say cover the north approach, and she had adjusted, and she had been close enough to adjust, because she had been moving to the end phase for 20 minutes. The AI flagged 4 simultaneous eliminations, 4 remaining. And then the thing happened that nobody, not Holloway, not Hargrove, not Reyes monitoring from Sector 8, not even Rivers at the monitoring station had predicted. She stepped out, not from a concealed position into another concealed position, not from terrain to terrain. She stepped out of the tree line at the southern edge of the flat, and she walked onto the open ice in plain sight of the 4 remaining operators, rifle at her shoulder, not at her side in an action that broke every principle of her own doctrine, visible, exposed, offering herself as a target on open ground. 4 operators, 4 weapons, overlapping coverage on an exposed target at under 40 meters. Nobody fired, not because of some tactical reason, not because of a coordination failure or a decision matrix or a read of the terrain. They didn't fire because the act of her walking out into the open, the complete and deliberate abandonment of the invulnerability she'd maintained for 7 hours was so unexpected, so genuinely and confoundingly human that it short-circuited the automatic response. She walked until she was 20 meters from Holloway. She stopped. She lowered the rifle. She looked at him. I could end this right now, she said. I have the angle on all 4 of you. I know, he said. And you're not going to shoot me, she said. It wasn't a question. No, he said. We're not. She held his gaze. Why not? Holloway thought about it. He thought about it seriously the way the question deserved, because it would be the right tactical move, he said. And I'm not sure tactical is what this is anymore. Something moved in her expression. Small, real. No, she said, it's not. The wind cut across the flat between them. So what happens now? Holloway said. She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the 4 remaining operators around him, really looked at them the way she'd been looking at the terrain all day, reading the shape of them and what they were and what the day had made them. Then she said, you surrender. Is that an order? He said. It's an offer, she said, the same offer my father built into the doctrine. When the control phase is complete and the end phase is confirmed and the remaining units understand the outcome, they can choose to make it real. No more flags, no more AI confirmation. Just the acknowledgement between the people who were there that it happened and what it meant. Holloway looked at her for a long time. Then he set his weapon down on the ice. One by one, the 3 other operators set theirs down beside his. Not because the AI told them to, not because Rivers called it over the monitoring channel, not because protocol demanded it, because she had walked out into the open and made herself real, and the only honest response to a gesture that genuine was to be equally genuine back. She looked at the 4 weapons on the ice. Then she looked at Holloway. And she said something he would carry for the rest of his career. My father used to say that the strongest thing a soldier can do is recognize strength in someone they weren't prepared to find it in. He said most people never learn that. He said the ones who do, they're the ones worth fighting beside. Holloway held that. Who taught you to do what you did today? He said. My father, she said, but he's gone. I know, Holloway said. And he did know. He had put it together over the course of the day, the program, the doctrine, the specificity of her preparation, the way Rivers talked about her, the things she said, and the things she didn't say. He had put it together and arrived at a shape that he hadn't been ready to hold at 0500 and was barely ready to hold now. I'm sorry, he said. Thank you, she said. They stood on the ice in the blizzard, 4 operators and one 18-year-old who had spent 7 hours teaching them something they hadn't known they needed to learn, and the snow fell on all of them equally and without judgment. At the monitoring station, Rivers watched the thermal imagery of 5 heat signatures standing still in the middle of the Sector 9 ice flat. He let the image run for 30 seconds. Then he picked up the radio. All units, he said. Exercise concluded. Return to base. He set the radio down. He looked at the screen for another moment. Then very quietly, so that only the tech sitting beside him could have heard it, he said something that had nothing to do with doctrine or evaluation or Winter Phantom protocol. He said, well done, James. And the tech who had been watching all day and had not known whose name that was, understood that it was not addressed to anyone in the room. The walk back to the base took 41 minutes. Nobody talked much. The blizzard was still running at full force and the wind made conversation difficult, and maybe everyone needed the silence anyway, needed the space between the ice flat and the base doors to let the day settle into something they could carry without dropping it. 40 operators, or what remained of them, in active status, moving through the storm in the particular quiet of people who have been changed by something and are only beginning to understand the shape of the change. Holloway walked at the front of the column, not because he was leading anymore, or not only because of that, but because the front of the column was where he had always walked, and some habits are the last things to go. He kept his eyes forward and his pace steady, and he did not look back, but he was aware with the peripheral, full-body awareness of a man who has spent 17 years reading the space around him, of every operator behind him and the quality of their movement and what it said about where they were. They were not defeated. That was the thing he needed to hold on to and keep holding on to, because the easy narrative, the one that wrote itself, the one that the outside world would construct if they ever heard about this day, was that 40 elite operators had been beaten by an 18-year-old girl, and that was the whole story. Humiliation, loss, the end. But Holloway had been inside it, and what he knew from the inside was more complicated and more true and harder to put into words than any simple version of events. They had been taught something. There was a difference. At 2:58, the base doors opened and the 40 operators filed into the debrief room, with the slow, deliberate movement of men who had been in extreme cold for 8 hours and whose bodies were now processing the return to warmth in the complicated, slightly bewildering way that rewarming always worked. Relief and discomfort simultaneously, the body catching up to the environment with a delay that felt personal. Ava was already inside. She had moved faster than the column, which surprised nobody at this point, and she was standing at the front of the debrief room next to Commander Rivers with her rifle leaned against the wall behind her and a mug of something hot in her hands. She had taken off the outer layer of her cold weather gear, and she looked standing there like exactly what she was. 18 years old, 5 feet 4 inches tall, wearing standard issue thermals and boots, drinking what turned out to be black coffee with the unceremonious efficiency of someone who needed the calories more than the ritual. The 40 operators filed in and found seats or places against the walls, and the room filled up with the sound of gear being set down and boots being pulled off, and the small involuntary noises of cold bodies slowly coming back to themselves. Nobody said anything for almost 2 minutes. Then Reyes said from somewhere in the middle of the room, I had you at 45 minutes. A beat. The pool, Torres said. The pool, Reyes confirmed. I had her at 45 minutes to first elimination. Briggs had 15. Webb had 30. You're bringing up the pool, Hargrove said. I'm acknowledging the pool, Reyes said. There's a difference. Another beat, and then from somewhere in the back, the sound of someone laughing. Not bitter, not performance. just the genuine, helpless laughter of a man whose body needed to release something that had been building for 8 hours and had finally found the exit. It spread. Not to everyone. Holloway didn't laugh. Martinez didn't laugh, but enough. Enough that the room's temperature changed in a way that had nothing to do with the heating system. Ava looked at Reyes. 45 minutes was generous, she said. I know, he said. I told you I was a generous man. Briggs was closer, she said. First elimination was 41 minutes. Briggs, the second Briggs, who had been eliminated on the North Ridge, looked up from across the room with an expression that was equal parts wounded pride and involuntary satisfaction. I want it on record, he said, that winning a bet I didn't actually win is not as satisfying as I expected. More laughter. Holloway didn't laugh, but something in his face changed. The specific, controlled blankness of a man holding his expression together with long practice developed a small crack, and through the crack was something that might have been the early-stage precursor to a smile. At 3:07, Commander Rivers moved to the front of the room. The laughter stopped, not because Rivers demanded it. He didn't do anything as deliberate as that. It stopped because his movement had a gravity to it, the kind that comes to people who have been carrying something important for a long time and are now about to set it down. He stood beside Ava. He looked at the room, and then he said the thing that changed everything. Ava Hale was never a candidate. The room went so still that the sound of the heating system became audible. 40 operators looked at Rivers, looked at Ava, looked back at Rivers. What? Holloway said. She was not evaluated today, Rivers said. You were. The sentence sat in the room for 3 full seconds before anyone breathed. She was the evaluation, Rivers continued, and his voice was steady and measured and completely without apology. The entire exercise, the insertion, the AI monitoring the scenario parameters, was designed to evaluate SEAL Team Delta against a specific methodology, the Winter Phantom methodology. And Ava was here to run that methodology against you at full operational capacity so that we could measure the result. Hargrove said very quietly, we were the subjects. Yes, Rivers said. She wasn't being tested, we were. Yes. The whole time. Since the moment she stepped off the transport, Rivers said. The silence that followed was not the silence of the ice flat which had been cold and open and full of wind. This silence was interior. It was the silence of a room full of people turning something over in their minds and finding a new face on it every time they thought they'd seen all the faces. Reyes spoke first, which was usually how it went. So the sniper candidate thing, administrative cover, Rivers said, necessary for the integrity of the evaluation. If you'd known she was the evaluation instrument, your responses would have been calibrated to that knowledge. The data would have been compromised. The data, Holloway said. The word came out flat, not angry, just processing. Your tactical responses under genuine conditions, Rivers said. How Delta Team actually performs against an unknown methodology in extreme environment. That's the data, and it's valuable. More valuable than any controlled evaluation we could have designed because it's real. Martinez said from his seat near the wall. She knew. The whole time she knew what the exercise was. Yes, Rivers said. And she ran it clean, Martinez said. It wasn't an accusation, it was something closer to recognition. She always does, Rivers said. At 3:14, Rivers said the second thing that changed everything. Ava Hale, he said, call sign Ghost 18, youngest instructor accepted into the Winter Phantom program in the program's 12-year history. He paused. And daughter of the program's founder. Major James Hale, United States Army, deceased 2 years and 4 months ago. The room absorbed that. Holloway looked at Ava. She was looking at the floor, not in shame, not in grief, just in the particular downward stillness of someone who has learned to hold a loss that is too large to carry with your eyes up all the time. She had held it all day. Through 7 hours of running a doctrine her dead father had built against 40 men who had dismissed her before she said a word in the exact kind of conditions her father had designed the doctrine to operate in. She had held it all day, and she was holding it now. Holloway stood up. It was not a calculated gesture. It was not a tactical decision or a leadership performance or a deliberate communication. It was simply the thing his body did before his mind fully caught up, stood up, because sitting felt wrong and standing felt necessary, and sometimes the body knows what the situation requires before the mind has finished processing the situation. He looked at her. I owe you an apology, he said. She looked up. 0500, he said. What I said, how I said it, the assumptions I brought in that room. He held her gaze. I was wrong about all of it, and I want to say that directly. She held his gaze. I know you were wrong, she said. That's why the evaluation works. That's not absolution, he said. No, she said. It's not. A beat. The apology stands, he said. She nodded once, small, real. Accepted, she said. At 3:20, Reyes stood up. He did it differently than Holloway, with less gravity, more self-awareness. The way Reyes did most things, which was with a recognition that he was performing something genuine, but was still performing it, and those two facts could both be true. I took my money out of the pool, he said to Ava, before the exercise started. I want you to know that. She looked at him. I know, she said. He blinked. You heard that. I was outside the equipment bay window for about 6 minutes before insertion, she said, conducting a final acoustic survey of the base perimeter. Reyes stared at her. It's standard pre-exercise reconnaissance, she said, and there was something in her voice, not quite amusement, but adjacent to it, the trace of someone who has a sense of humor that she keeps very close to her chest and only lets out in carefully measured increments. I told Torres you moved before you had to, Reyes said. You did. You heard that too? Yes. And you used it? Yes. Reyes thought about this for a moment. Was there anything you didn't know about us going in? He said. She thought about it seriously the way she thought about most things. Martinez, she said, the random movement pattern. I had read the file. I understood the tendency toward patience in physical methodology. I did not predict that he would abandon doctrine voluntarily. She looked at Martinez. That was outside my models. Martinez said nothing, but something in his expression shifted the quiet satisfaction of a man who has been told by the person running the evaluation that he had found the edge of the methodology, that somewhere in his decision to move like a man who had forgotten his training, he had done the one thing that mattered most, surprised her. 4 minutes, Martinez said. 4 minutes, she confirmed. Long time, he said. The longest of the day, she said. At 3:31, Rivers cleared his throat. There's one more thing, he said. The room looked at him. He picked up a folder from the table beside him, a physical folder paper, the kind that said, this is official and deliberate and not being communicated through a screen because some things require paper. He set it on the table in front of Ava. Winter Phantom Program Expansion, he said. Congressional authorization was signed 3 weeks ago. We've been allocated resources to bring the methodology to 4 additional SEAL teams over the next 18 months. Full integration, curriculum development, field evaluation. He paused. The program needs instructors who know the doctrine from the inside. Everyone looked at Ava. She looked at the folder. She did not reach for it immediately. She stood and looked at it with the expression of someone who has been moving toward a specific moment for a very long time and is now standing in front of it and needs one more second before the movement becomes a rival. You're offering me a teaching position, she said. I'm offering you the teaching position, Rivers said. Lead instructor, Winter Phantom Expansion Program. You'd be responsible for curriculum design and field evaluation across all 4 teams. I'm 18, she said. I know, he said. These men are... She looked around the room at 40 operators with a combined total of something like 500 years of service between them. They have careers longer than I've been alive. Yes, Rivers said, and you just spent 8 hours teaching them something none of that career experience had equipped them to know. He held her gaze. That's not an argument against the offer. That is the offer. Ava looked at the folder for another long moment. Then she looked at Holloway. He didn't know why she looked at him specifically. Maybe because he had been the one at 0500 who had made the calculation. Maybe because his particular wrongness was the one she needed to see move before she could believe the rest of it. Maybe for some other reason entirely that he would never fully know. Would you train under this program, she said. Already did, he said. Would you do it formally, as curriculum? He thought about the ice flat, about 8 hours of being methodically and visibly completely outplayed, about a branch moving in the wrong direction and Webb and Kovacs going down before any of them understood what they were looking at, about a girl walking out onto open ice and setting her rifle down and offering a doctrine built by a dead man to the people who had dismissed her as a gift. Yes, he said, without question. She picked up the folder. At 3:44, someone asked the question that had been sitting in the room since Rivers made his announcement, waiting for enough space to be asked. It was Castillo, young second evaluation eliminated early, had spent most of the day watching from the sidelines of his own humiliation. He asked it the way young people ask hard questions, which is directly because they haven't yet learned to be strategic about when to speak. "What was your father like?" he said. The room went quiet in a different way. Ava held the folder against her chest and looked at Castillo, and for a moment, just a moment, the expression on her face was not the controlled, precise, completely present expression she had worn all day. It was something younger, something that hadn't been on any exercise, hadn't been in any doctrine, hadn't been part of any evaluation. It was just a daughter thinking about her father. "He was the most patient man I ever knew," she said. "He could wait longer than the weather. He used to say that the wilderness doesn't respect urgency, it only respects presence. You have to be there fully for as long as it takes, and then it shows you what it knows." She paused. "He applied that to everything, the tactics, the teaching, people." "He applied it to you," Castillo said. "Since I was 12, and she said, "He didn't teach me to be a sniper. He taught me to think like terrain, to see the whole board before I put a single piece on it, to know that the goal is never elimination. The goal is understanding, and elimination is just the evidence that understanding worked." "Did he know this would happen?" Castillo said. "This evaluation, you against a full team." "He designed it," she said. "He proposed it to Rivers 6 years ago as the final proof of concept for the Winter Phantom program. The idea that one fully trained practitioner of the methodology could demonstrate its superiority against a full conventional team in real conditions." She looked at Rivers. "He didn't live to run it." Rivers held her gaze. "He trained the person who would run it," Rivers said. She looked back at Castillo. "He knew," she said. "He always knew where things were going. That was the other thing about patience. It lets you see far enough ahead that arrival stops being a surprise." At 3:59, Holloway asked the question he had been building toward since the moment he saw the branch move in the wrong direction on the cool side of Sector 5. "When did you know?" he said. Ava looked at him. "Know what?" "That we weren't going to catch you. That the exercise was going to go the way it went. When did you know for certain?" She thought about it. Genuinely, she took the question as seriously and gave it real thought, which was the thing about her that Holloway had started to understand and couldn't stop noticing. She didn't perform consideration. She considered. 0640, she said, 14 minutes after insertion, when I read Briggs's movement pattern entering Sector 2 and understood that he was going to do exactly what his file said he would do in exactly the terrain his file said he preferred at exactly the pace his previous evaluation scores predicted. She paused. When someone's behavior matches their file completely, when there's no variance, no surprise, no gap between who they were in the past and who they are right now, the outcome of an engagement becomes very close to certain. "And us," Holloway said. "When did we stop being predictable?" "Martinez," she said. 12:13, when he moved without pattern. She looked at Martinez. "You created the first genuine variable of the day. For 4 minutes I was running on observation instead of prediction. That's the most alive I felt during the whole exercise." The room was quiet. "That's a strange way to put it," Hargrove said. "The most alive. When you're always ahead of what's happening," she said, "it can start to feel like you're watching a recording instead of living in it." Martinez made it real. She paused. Crawford made it real too, just differently. At 4:07, Rivers called the formal end of the debrief. He did it with less ceremony than the moment deserved, which was probably right. The ceremony was already in the room, had been in the room for the last hour. Didn't need official language to announce it. "Evaluation data will be compiled and submitted to Joint Special Operations Command within 72 hours, he said. "All personnel are on 48-hour stand-down effective immediately." Dismissed. People started moving. Gear was picked up. Conversations started, the quiet, genuine conversations of men who have been through something together and are beginning the process of making it into a shared story, which is what humans do with experience when experience matters enough. Reyes walked up to Ava before she reached the door. "Can I ask one more thing?" he said. "Yes," she said. "The betting pool. Before the exercise, I asked you if you knew what you'd walked into." He met her eyes. "You said yes. Did you know about the pool specifically?" She looked at him. "I heard you setting it up," she said. Through the equipment bay window. Reyes stared at her. You heard me setting up a betting pool on how fast you'd be eliminated, he said, and you said nothing. It was useful information, she said. It told me the baseline assumption was zero threat, she said, which confirmed that the evaluation conditions were optimal. If any of you had come in with genuine uncertainty about my capabilities, the exercise would have been harder. She paused. Arrogance is terrain too. You navigate it the same way you navigate anything, by understanding it completely before you move. Reyes looked at her for a long moment. Your father, he said, was he as terrifying as you? Something crossed her face, that young thing again, the daughter thing. More, she said. He was patient enough to be gentle about it. At 4:20, Holloway found Ava standing alone outside the base in the storm, with her face turned into the wind. He didn't know why she was standing outside in negative 35-degree wind chill instead of inside with a second cup of coffee, but he had spent a day learning not to apply his own framework to her choices, so he stood beside her without asking. They stood in the wind for a moment. You're going to take the position, he said. Not a question. Yes, she said. Good, he said. Another moment. I've been thinking about what you said, he said. On the flat, about your father. The difference between a weapon and a warrior. What about it? I've been in this business 17 years, he said, and nobody ever put it to me that way. It sounds obvious when you say it. Of course, a warrior protects. Of course, that's the distinction. But I don't think I actually believed it in my bones until I watched you pull Crawford out of the water in the middle of an exercise you were winning with both hands tied behind your back. She was quiet. My father didn't build the doctrine to create better shooters, she said. He built it because he believed that the most dangerous person in any environment is the one who understands it completely. And that understanding, real understanding, always leads to protection before it leads to elimination. Because when you understand something completely, you also understand what it costs to lose it. He was talking about people, Holloway said. He was always talking about people, she said. The terrain was just how he taught it. Holloway stood in the storm beside an 18-year-old who had just spent 8 hours proving that her father was right. And he thought about 17 years and all the things he'd known with certainty and all the ways that certainty had cost him something he hadn't been tracking carefully enough to notice. I'll be at your first curriculum session, he said. She looked at him. You don't have to do that, she said. I know, he said. That's why I'm doing it. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at the storm. He would have liked you, she said. Eventually. Eventually, Holloway said. You had to lose first, she said. He always said you can't really respect a methodology until you've been inside its failure from the receiving end. Until it's happened to you and not to someone else. She paused. You're better equipped now than you were at 0500. That's a generous way to describe getting dismantled, he said. It's an accurate one, she said. Inside the base through the window, Reyes was writing something in his notebook. Torres was asleep in his chair. Martinez was sitting with Castillo, talking quietly. And from the way Castillo was leaning forward, it was clear that Martinez was teaching him something not formally, not with any structure, just the way experienced people teach willing people when the experience is fresh enough to still be alive in both of them. The 40 operators were already becoming different versions of themselves than they had been at 0500. Not because they had lost, because they had lost to something worth losing to, and that was the whole difference, and it was enormous. At 4:37, Rivers found Ava outside and stood beside her for a moment without speaking. He was the third person to come stand beside her in the storm, which she accepted without comment, because she was, among other things, the kind of person who understood that people needed to come stand beside her right now, and she allowed it. Your father asked me to make sure you heard this, Rivers said. She looked at him. He reached into his jacket and took out an envelope. Not new, worn at the edges, soft with handling, the kind of envelope that has been carried in a pocket for a long time. She looked at it. He wrote it after he designed the evaluation, Rivers said. He gave it to me and told me to give it to you when it was over. He paused. He said when she's done, not before. He was specific about that. She took the envelope. She held it in both hands in the storm for a long moment. She did not open it. She looked at her name on the front in her father's handwriting. She had seen that handwriting on every page of every document he had ever given her. Every field note, every doctrine, revision, every margin, annotation, and every training manual she had grown up reading. Ava, just her name, in his hand. She held it against her chest. "Thank you," she said to Rivers. He nodded once. He went back inside. She stood in the storm alone and held the letter, and the snow fell on her shoulders, and the wind moved around her the way it moves around anything that is still and certain and has been standing in it long enough to become part of it. She did not open the letter there. That was private, and she was 18 years old, and she had just spent 8 hours running her father's doctrine against 40 of the best operators in the world, and proving it worked, and she needed 1 minute that belonged entirely to her before she opened the last thing he had written to tell her so. She got that minute. Then she went inside. At 5:02, the storm outside Fort Kodiak began to ease. Inside the debrief room, 40 operators and one 18-year-old instructor were eating whatever the base kitchen had put together: sandwiches, hot soup, coffee, in quantities that suggested everyone was planning to be awake for a while and talking. Not debriefing, not analyzing, just talking the way people talk when something has happened to them together and they are in the early phase of understanding what it means and what they are going to carry forward from it. Reyes was explaining his notebook observations to anyone who would listen, which turned out to be most of the room. Martinez was drinking coffee and saying almost nothing, which was normal for Martinez, but had a different quality to it now, the silence of a man with more to think about, which is different from the silence of a man with less to say. Hargrove was talking to Castillo about the North Ridge ambush, with the specific honesty of someone reconstructing an error they have fully accepted as their own. Holloway was sitting with the folder Rivers had given Ava, which she had left on the table when she went to get food. He was not opening it. It was not his to open, but he was looking at it, looking at the official language on the cover and thinking about what it meant that the Winter Phantom program was about to expand, that the doctrine James Hale had built in 6 years of deliberate, patient, completely committed work was going to move into the operational vocabulary of 4 additional SEAL teams, and that the person who was going to teach it was 18 years old and had just proven in the most definitive way available that she was exactly the right person. Ava came back with a bowl of soup and sat down and picked up the folder without comment. She looked at Holloway. "You can ask," she said. "The letter," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "He said he was proud of me," she said. "He said he always knew the program would work because he built it for an environment that doesn't reward shortcuts. And the one thing he was always sure of was that I would never take one." She paused. "He said the hardest part of building something is letting it exist without you. He said he was glad Rivers would be there. And he said," she stopped. "You don't have to," Holloway said. "He said the operators who go through this evaluation will come out better than they went in," she said. "Not because they were defeated, because they were shown something real. And real things change people in real ways, and that's the whole point, and that's enough." She set the letter down on the table. "That's the whole point," Holloway said, "and that's enough." "Yes," she said. They sat in the base on Christmas Eve, while the storm outside Fort Kodiak finally after 12 hours began to quiet. 40 operators who had arrived arrogant and certain and had spent 8 hours being systematically, completely, and entirely disassembled by one person who understood something they hadn't known they needed to understand. And were now sitting in the aftermath of that understanding, eating soup, drinking coffee, and beginning the long, real, irreversible process of becoming better. Not because they had lost, because of what they had lost too. And at the front of the room, a girl who was 18 years old and had been carrying her father's doctrine and her father's death, and her father's absolute patient, enduring belief that mastery recognizes no rank, no age, no gender, no expectation. That girl picked up the Winter Phantom program folder, opened it to the first page, and began to read. She was not a candidate. She had never been a candidate. She was the one who would train the ones who survived the impossible, and she had proven it. And now the work began, and she was ready, and the storm was over, and the snow outside Fort Kodiak fell clean and quiet and without judgment on everything it touched. That was enough. That was everything. The 48-hour stand-down ended on the 26th, and the operators of SEAL Team Delta went home. They went home the way men go home after something has happened to them that they don't yet have the words for. Quietly, carrying it. Reyes flew back to San Diego and did not, for the first time in his adult life, make a single joke on the flight. Martinez drove 4 hours through the dark to a house where his wife was already asleep and sat at the kitchen table until morning, with a glass of water he never drank. Turning a day over in his mind the way a man turns a stone, he found in a place stones shouldn't be. Holloway went back to nothing in particular. He was not a man with much waiting for him, and spent the stand down on a heavy bag in an empty gym, hitting it slower than he ever had, like he was trying to remember why he'd ever thought speed was the point. And in a base apartment at Fort Kodiak that the Army had assigned to her father 6 years before, and never reassigned an 18-year-old, read a letter 11 more times, folded it into the same worn creases, and put it in the inner pocket of a jacket she would wear every day for the next 2 years. That was December. The work began in March. At 0500 on the 3rd of March, 4 months in one lifetime after the first time the transport helicopter set down on the frozen landing strip at Fort Kodiak, and a new set of boots hit the ice. 2 full SEAL teams this time. 38 operators drawn from the first wave of the Winter Phantom expansion, men who had been told only that they were being sent north for advanced cold weather doctrine, and that the instructor cadre was the best the program had. They came off the helicopters in the way men always come off helicopters into Alaska in March, chests, forward jaws set, treating the cold like something they personally intended to dominate. They had not been told who the instructor was. That was deliberate. Rivers had insisted on it. Some things he had learned only work the first time if you let them happen the first time. They assembled at the edge of the landing strip and found waiting for them a cadre of 5. 4 of them they recognized by reputation, if not by face. Senior Chief Derek Holloway, 17 years, 4 continents, a name that arrived in rooms before he did. Chief Raymond Martinez, Petty Officer Dominic Reyes, who had apparently filled an entire notebook with something the rest of the community was already calling half joking and half not the Kodiak Papers. Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb, quiet and grizzled, and exactly as advertised. And next to them in standard cold weather gear that fit her well-dark hair, pulled back in a tight braid, holding a rifle that looked almost comically oversized for her frame, stood a girl who could not possibly have been older than 19. The math happened on the 38 faces at once. Holloway watched it happen. He had a particular reason to watch it happen because he had done that math himself in this exact spot 4 months ago and arrived at an answer so conclusive he had almost felt sorry for her. He waited to see who would speak first. It was a senior chief named Avery Doyle, 21 years, in a chest full of ribbons, the kind of operator who had earned every assumption he carried and had therefore stopped questioning whether his assumptions were correct. He looked at the girl, he looked at the 4 legends standing beside her, and he made the same mistake 40 men had made in December, which was to believe that the most decorated person present was automatically the most knowledgeable. Senior Chief Holloway, Doyle said with the easy confidence of a man addressing a peer, appreciate the welcome. Who's the kid? The cold did the thing it does in Alaska, which is to make silence physical. Holloway did not answer. Neither did Reyes, who in another life would have already been 3 sentences into something clever. Neither did Martinez, who said almost nothing on the best of days. Neither did Webb. They just looked at Doyle, the 4 of them, with an expression he could not immediately read, because it was an expression he had no recent experience receiving. It was patience. It was the specific, unhurried patience of people who know something you don't and have decided to let you find it out the hard way because they found it out the hard way and they have learned that the hard way is the only way it takes. She's the instructor, Holloway said finally. Doyle waited for the rest of it, the part where this turned out to be a joke or a hazing or a test of his composure. It didn't come. The instructor, Doyle said. Lead instructor, Holloway said. Winter Phantom expansion, call sign Ghost 18. You'll be evaluated by her, you'll be taught by her, and at the end of 72 hours, if you're very lucky, you'll understand about 1/10 of what she understood before she got off that helicopter. He paused. I'm telling you that as a courtesy, the same courtesy nobody gave me. Doyle looked at Ava. Ava looked back at Doyle. She didn't blink. She had Holloway notice gotten even better at not blinking. If such a thing were possible, there was no challenge in it now. No proving. There was only the flat, complete attention of someone reading terrain, and Avery Doyle, 21 years a SEAL, had just become terrain. What's your record distance? Doyle asked, because some scripts run on rails. It's longer than it was in December, Ava said. And that was all she said. She turned and walked toward the briefing room, and the cadre fell in around her without being told to, and 38 operators stood in the cold and watched 4 of the most respected men in the special operations community arrange themselves unconsciously and completely into orbit around a teenage girl. Doyle stood there a moment longer than the rest. Then he picked up his gear and followed, and somewhere behind his eyes, a small, important crack had already begun. This time, the exercise was not the point. That was the first thing they all had to unlearn, and it was the hardest because everything in their training had taught them that the exercise was always the point. In December, Ava had run a doctrine against 40 men to prove the doctrine worked. The proving was over. The doctrine worked. What remained, what the 18 months of the expansion existed to accomplish, was something harder than winning. And Ava had spent the months since Christmas figuring out how to teach it. She did not start by demonstrating dominance. She started by giving it away. "You're going to lose the first exercise," she told them on the first morning in the briefing room where 4 months earlier she had read 42 personnel files into a single calm sentence. "All of you. Completely. It's already decided. I want you to lose it paying attention instead of losing it competing, because the losing isn't the lesson. The losing is just the cost of admission to the lesson." She let that sit. The lesson is what happens in your head when you stop being able to win. Doyle, near the back, with the reflexive resistance of a man who has spent 2 decades being the answer in room, said, "And what's supposed to happen in our heads?" "You're supposed to get quiet," Ava said. "Most operators have never been in a situation they couldn't muscle outshoot or out-aggress their way out of. The first time they meet one, the noise in their head gets louder, more aggression, more movement, more certainty, faster decisions. That noise is the enemy. The terrain doesn't respect it. The cold doesn't respect it, and neither do I." She paused. "My father used to say the wilderness only respects presence. You have to be there fully, for as long as it takes. The exercise is going to take everything you think you are and prove it isn't enough. And what's underneath, what's left, when the certainty burns off, that's the operator we're actually here to train." In the back of the room, Reyes was not taking notes for once. He was watching the faces of the new men, and he was seeing in them the exact sequence he had lived in December: the dismissal, the doubt, the early stage fracture, and he found that watching it from the outside was its own kind of education. He leaned over to Martinez. "She's gotten better at this," he murmured. "She's gotten better at letting people fail safely," Martinez said. "That's a different skill than winning. Harder one." "You think Doyle makes it?" Martinez watched Doyle, who was sitting with his arms crossed and his jaw set and his entire posture organized around the proposition that he had nothing to learn from a 19-year-old. "He's exactly where Holloway was at 0500, Martinez said. "So yeah, if he's the man his record says he is, he makes it." A pause. "If he's only the man his ribbons say he is, he doesn't." At 0600 the next morning, the first exercise of the expansion program began, and it went exactly the way Ava had told them it would go. She did not run it alone this time. That was the change, the one that made the whole thing real instead of theatrical. In December, she had been one person demonstrating a doctrine. Now she was a cadre transmitting one. Holloway took the high ground and ran a conventional command position, not to win, but to show the new men the most sophisticated version of the old thinking, so they could feel the exact moment it failed. Reyes ran observation, narrating the eliminations as they came in, teaching the newbie operator to read the pattern the way he had taught himself to read it in the snow, with frozen fingers and a ballpoint pen. Martinez taught the variable the single most valuable thing he knew, which was how to become unpredictable, how to abandon your own doctrine on purpose, how to make yourself the one thing the terrain can't account for. And Ava ran the board. She ran it the way she always had, with the patience that could wait longer than the weather, and one by one, the 38 operators of 2 elite teams went down across 12 miles of frozen wilderness without a single confirmed sighting of the shooter, and one by one they sat down in the snow where the AI had flagged them and felt the noise in their heads get louder, and then eventually, if they were any good, get quiet. Doyle lasted longer than most. He was, it turned out, the man his record said he was. He fought it with everything 21 years had given him. He consolidated, he adapted, he refused the marked routes, he did all the right things in all the right orders, and Ava dismantled every one of them with the unhurried inevitability of water finding the crack in a dam. And at hour 6, when Doyle was one of 4 operators remaining, he did something that made Holloway, watching the thermal feed at the monitoring station, go very still. He stopped moving. He stopped moving, and he stopped fighting, and he sat down in the snow on his own before the AI flagged him before he was eliminated while he was technically still alive in the exercise. And he keyed his radio, and he said to the open channel to whoever was listening, "I don't know what you're doing. I've been doing this for 21 years, and I genuinely do not understand what you are doing to us, and I want to learn it. There was a silence on the channel. And then Ava's voice quiet as the snow itself. That's the exercise. You just passed it. I'm not eliminated, Doyle said. You stopped competing and started learning, she said. That's the only thing I was ever trying to teach you. The flag doesn't matter. That part never mattered. A pause. Welcome to the program's senior chief. At the monitoring station, Rivers allowed himself one small breath. Then very quietly, so that only the tech beside him could have heard it, he said something that had nothing to do with doctrine or evaluation. You see it, James? It's teaching itself now. It doesn't need her to win anymore. It just needs her to show them the door. The tech who had learned by now, whose name that was, said nothing. He just watched the screen where 38 heat signatures sat scattered and still across 12 miles of wilderness getting quiet. The afternoon of the second day, Lucas Crawford came back. Nobody had told the new operators the story of the ice. It wasn't in any briefing Ava had asked that it not be because she did not want the rescue used as a credential, did not want the thing she had done because it was right to be repackaged as a thing she had done to be impressive. But the men of Delta knew it. It lived in them, and when the door of the base opened in the middle of the afternoon debrief, and Lucas Crawford walked in out of medical, off light duty, 2 months and 3 weeks after a frozen lake had nearly killed him, every one of them stood up without deciding to. Crawford had a slight limp now in the cold. The doctor said it would fade. He crossed the room to where Ava was standing at the front, and he stopped in front of her, and for a moment the 18-year-old, who could wait longer than the weather, did not seem to know what to do with her hands. Senior Chief Crawford, she said. You pulled me out of the water, Crawford said. There were 3 other operators. You told me to think about Emma, Crawford said. You knew her name. You knew her name and her age, and you put her in front of me when I was going under, and I want you to understand that I held on to that. When I couldn't feel my hands anymore, when I couldn't talk, I held on to a 7-year-old's name that an 18-year-old I'd never met handed me on a frozen lake. His voice was steady, but it cost him something to keep it that way. I went home for Christmas. I got to go home for Christmas because of a doctrine about how to read terrain and a kid who decided that pulling me out mattered more than winning an exercise she'd already won. He reached into his jacket. He took out a folded piece of paper, a child's drawing crayon on construction paper, the corners soft from handling. He held it out to her. Emma made this for you, he said. She doesn't really understand what happened. She just knows a girl named Ava made sure her dad came home. I told her you were a soldier. She drew you a soldier. Ava took the drawing. She unfolded it. In the careful, enormous, crooked letters of a 7-year-old, it said, "Thank you, Ava." And beneath the words was a figure in green, standing in a field of blue crayon snow, and above the figure, very large, a yellow sun. Because 7-year-olds put the sun in everything. Because to a 7-year-old, the world is a place where the sun is always there, if you just remember to draw it. The 18-year-old, who had read 42 personnel files and run 12 simultaneous engagements, and never once in 8 hours taken a shot she didn't already know the outcome of, looked at a crayon drawing of herself standing in the snow under a sun a child had insisted on, and something moved across her face that had not been in any doctrine, had not been on any exercise, had not been part of any evaluation. It was just a person being thanked by a child for the thing that had actually mattered. My father used to say, she said, and her voice was not quite steady, which it almost never wasn't, that the difference between a weapon and a warrior is what they protect. She held up the drawing so the room could see it. This is what we protect, she said. Not the exercise, not the flag, not the record distance or the elimination count or any of it. This, somebody's father getting to come home. That's the whole doctrine. The rest is just how you learn to be good enough at it to make sure it happens. She folded the drawing along its soft creases with the same care she folded the letter she carried in her inner pocket, and she put it in the same pocket against her father's last words where it would stay. In the back of the room, Avery Doyle, 21 years a SEAL who had walked off a helicopter the morning before believing he had nothing to learn from a 19-year-old, put his face in his hands for a moment and then took it out again, composed, and would never afterward be able to fully explain to anyone why that had been the moment the whole thing landed for him. It wasn't the doctrine that got him. It was the sun a 7-year-old had drawn over a field of snow. They named it that spring. It happened without much ceremony, which was right because the people who would have most appreciated ceremony were the people least inclined to it. The congressional authorization had funded the expansion, but it had funded it as a program, an initiative, a line item. Winter Phantom, the operational designation, neutral and bureaucratic. And in April, when the first cohort completed and the curriculum was certified, and the methodology was formally entered into the Special Operations Training, Canon Rivers submitted a single additional request to the certifying authority. He requested that the doctrine itself, not the program, the doctrine, the body of method and principle, that had been built over 6 patient years by one man in a base apartment at Fort Kodiak, be entered into the record under the name of the man who built it. It went through in May. There is a document now in the archives of the Joint Special Operations Command that begins with a line that did not used to be there. It says the Hale method, after Major James Hale, United States Army, 1971 to 2023 originator. Ava was not present when it was certified. She was in the field on the second cohort running an exercise. Rivers had to track her down by radio to tell her, and he chose his moment, and he chose it badly on purpose, because he had learned over the years that the truest things should be said in the middle of the work and not in the hush of a ceremony. Ghost 18 Monitoring Station. Be advised, the certifying authority entered the doctrine into the canon this morning. It's official record now, under his name. There was a silence on the channel. The new operators who were mid-exercise and getting systematically dismantled did not know what the transmission meant. They only knew that the instructor, who never paused, who could wait longer than the weather, who had not for 1 second in any of their training shown anything other than complete and unhurried control, did not respond for 9 full seconds. Then she said, "Copy monitoring station. Thank you." And that was all. But the second cohort would later swear, and they were trained observers, so it meant something that for the next 20 minutes of that exercise, the doctrine ran with a precision they had not seen even from her, a fluency that was almost grief and almost joy, and was probably both the way a person performs the work of someone they loved when they have just been told officially and on the record that the someone they loved will be remembered. She finished the exercise. She always finished the exercise. And that night alone in the base apartment that the Army had finally formally reassigned to her, she took the letter out of her inner pocket and read it an 11th and final time, and then she put it in a frame because some things you carry until you can set them down, and she had finally arrived at the place where she could set this one down. She had needed 2 years and 4 months and 42 personnel files and 1 frozen lake and a crayon sun to get there. But she had gotten there. That was enough. The expansion ran 18 months, and at the end of it, the Hale method belonged to 5 SEAL teams and then to more than 5, because the men who learned it taught it the way Reyes had taught the new cohorts to read the pattern, the way Martinez had taught them the variable, the way Holloway had taught them more than anything the specific and difficult discipline of recognizing strength in someone you weren't prepared to find it in. Doyle became an instructor. So did Crawford when his leg fully healed, and there was a particular rightness to that, a man teaching others how to read the terrain that had nearly killed him, telling the story of the ice not as a credential, but as the truest possible illustration of the only point that ever mattered. The goal is never elimination. The goal is understanding. And understanding, real understanding, always leads to protection before it leads to anything else. Because when you understand something completely, you also understand what it costs to lose it. Reyes never did stop carrying the notebook. They published it eventually, a redacted, unclassified version. The Kodiak Papers observations from the inside of a methodology by a man who had been on the receiving end of it before he ever understood it. It opened with a dedication that was 4 words long. It said, "For the kid, thanks." And Holloway requested at the end of the expansion a permanent assignment to Fort Kodiak. The community was surprised. Men with 17, then 18, then 19 years, and a name like his did not usually request the cold and the quiet in the work of teaching. They moved up. They moved on. They took the assignments that built toward the next thing. Holloway took the snow. When they asked him why, and they did ask him because it didn't fit the shape of the career he was supposed to want, he told them the truth, which he had become over the course of a single Christmas Eve, and everything after it, the kind of man who could. Because the most important thing I learned here, he said. I learned it the hard way, from a person I'd written off in the first 90 seconds in conditions I thought I owned. And there's a kid getting off a transport helicopter at 0500 every cycle who's about to make the exact mistake I made. I'd like to be there when they make it. He paused. Somebody was there for me. The least I can do is be there for the next one. It is Christmas Eve again at Fort Kodiak. It is the third one now since a girl stepped off a transport helicopter into negative 22-degree air and let a senior chief take her rifle out of her hands and hold it over her head like a trophy and tell her while 40 men roared that the thing weighed more than her future there. The snow is falling the way it fell that night, clean and quiet and without judgment on everything it touches. In the briefing room, a new cohort is assembling. They have come off the helicopters, chest forward, jaws set, treating the cold like something they intend to dominate, because that is how they always come. And that is fine because it is how everyone comes, and the coming is not the failure. The failure is only ever in refusing to let the cold teach you the thing you came to learn. At the front of the room stands a woman who is 21 years old now. She has dark hair pulled back in a tight braid and gray-green eyes, the particular shade people call storm-colored, and a stillness about her that makes younger operators instinctively straighten their posture, the way they once straightened it for a man named Rivers, who retired last spring and who stood at the very back of her final expansion ceremony and did not say a word and did not need to. She has a rifle leaned against the wall behind her. She has a child's crayon drawing and a framed letter in an apartment a half-mile away, set down, now carried, no longer kept. She has standing in loose orbit around her a cadre of instructors with a combined 200 years of service who would every one of them walk into that storm tonight on her word alone. And she has a doctrine built by her father in 6 patient years, proven by her in 8 impossible hours, certified into the permanent record under his name and alive now, in the hands of more operators than her father ever lived to imagine. That says the most dangerous person in any environment is the one who understands it completely, and that understanding, real understanding, always leads to protection before it leads to anything else. She looks at the new cohort. She looks at the men who do not yet know what they are about to be taught, who do not yet know that they are not the reference frame, who do not yet know that the thing they are about to lose is worth losing because of what they will lose it to. She does not blink. "Welcome to Fort Kodiak," she says. "My name is Ava Hale. Over the next 72 hours, you are going to learn that mastery recognizes no rank, no age, no expectation. You're going to learn it the hard way because it's the only way it takes, and because someone learned it the hard way before you, and they're standing in this room right now, and they'll tell you it was the most important thing that ever happened to them." Somewhere in the room, a young operator, second evaluation, eliminated early in every simulation he has ever run, the kind of young that asks hard questions because he hasn't learned to be strategic about when to speak, raises his hand. "Who taught you?" he asks. Ava is quiet for a moment. Outside, the storm moves around the base the way it moves around anything that is still and certain and has been standing in it long enough to become part of it. The snow falls on the landing strip where 40 men once roared, and on the frozen lake where a father almost didn't come home, and on 12 miles of wilderness that has taught more operators to be quiet than any classroom ever built. And it falls without judgment, clean and patient, the way the best things always arrive. "My father," she says, "he's gone now, but he built all of this so that it could exist without him." She picks up the rifle from where it rests against the wall, easily, naturally, the way you hold a thing that has become an extension of your body, and she looks at 38 operators who do not yet understand that they have already, by walking through that door, become her students. "He used to say the hardest part of building something is letting it exist without you," she says. "And the best part is finding out it can." She looks at the storm through the window. She looks at the cadre standing in orbit around her. She looks at the new cohort and the young operator with the hard question and the long white silence of the Arctic night. "Let's begin," she says. And the snow falls clean and quiet and without judgment on everything it touches, and somewhere underneath it, the doctrine is already moving, patient, present, alive, passing from one set of hands to the next, the way the truest things do, the way her father always knew they would. That was the whole point, and that was enough. That was everything.